Johnson. Hey! It catches on its Johnson.
If he's plank of the week, he's got a sizable plank.
That's a whole different show.
Plank of the week, Fridays at 7 on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good afternoon. This is Bank Holiday Monday Drive with me, Peter Cardwell, here between now and 7 o'clock. Lots to discuss. I want to get your voice on the air and make sure your voice and your opinion is heard. Starmer's benefits U-turn. Could it blow a $5 billion hole in the budget? On a really interesting offer from Nigel Farage to Keir Starmer. He wants him to connect with working people. Farage is going to give a speech tomorrow. We'll cover it, of course, here on Talk. And he is saying that he wants Keir Starmer to come to a working men's club with him to see who connects more. In my political lifetime, I can honestly tell you there have been 5 politicians who have really, properly, truly connected with people, I would say. Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, Tony Blair, Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage. Not Keir Starmer as part of that list. What do you think about Farage's offer? Do you think Keir Starmer should go with him? What do you think might happen in the Working Men's Club should Keir Starmer go there? Is he a man of the people? We'll talk about Angela Rayner too, and she says she doesn't want to be leader of the Labour Party, doesn't want to be Prime Minister, very happy where she is. Everyone is emotional, says the Kremlin, after Trump calls Putin absolutely crazy. There is an offer of a ceasefire in the Middle East as well. Hamas have made that offer. Israel has rejected it. Also, Emmanuel Macron pushed in the face by his wife. What's going on there? We'll look at that video. Army leaders are told less shouting and more David Beckham in terms of training. Does that include kicking random Argentinians? That's my question. Liverpool are celebrating their title with an open-top bus parade. I know my friend Carol in Liverpool will be very, very happy about that. She's a huge Liverpool fan. We're going to talk as well about the sad death of the English pub. Rory Hanrahan is a pub landlord. He's also an Irishman, actually, but he loves the English pub and he manages 3 of them with his wife in Oxfordshire. He's written a beautiful article about this and saying that it's just really sad that pubs are dying and what can we really do to get them back. I know I love a pub. I'm not a drinker. I haven't had a drink in 7 years, but I know that pubs are a really, really important part of the fabric of English life and life for everybody else right around the UK and many other countries besides, but they are disappearing an awful lot. One of them closing every week was a recent statistic I heard. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well and let me know your thoughts. Do you like going down the boozer? What does it mean to you to do so? Because we talk so much about men and loneliness and not being able to connect with people and mental health, and maybe it's not any of those things to you. It's just the fact that you can go have a chat with a landlord, talk about the football and have just get things off your chest and chat to a few friends or even just regulars at the pub. What do you think about that? I'd love to hear from people who love their pub. 0344 499 1000. I was talking to David Bull a second ago, you might have heard it, and he was saying that he is fighting for his pub to be saved in his local area. And I remember a friend of mine, when I was buying my flat in my part of London, she said, does it pass the 2 pints test? A pint of beer and a pint of milk should be within 5 minutes walking distance if you don't have access to a car, which I currently don't. I am a driver, but I don't have a car because the part of London I live in, good transport links. Anyway, lots to discuss between now and 7 o'clock. You can give me your thoughts on 0344 499 1000. That's the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV, follow me at Peter Cardwell, and remember, the main number does 3 things. You can send me a voice note, and Amy is our technical operator today. She'll listen to them and play them out. Anything less than a minute will be considered. Please keep it to less than a minute so we get as many of them on the air as possible. 0344 499 1000 through WhatsApp. You can also send me a WhatsApp text message or give me a ring on that number, 0344 499 1000. I see the phones going already because there's plenty to discuss between now and 7 o'clock here on Talk. Well, let's turn to politics first. There's plenty of it about, and pressure on Keir Starmer in regard to 2 things. One is the 2-child benefit cap, and he is thinking, anyway, we're told, of scrapping that. Certainly there are many in the Labour Party who want him to do that. Interestingly, Nigel Farage says that the 2-child benefit cap should be scrapped as well. So you have Farage and Starmer probably in roughly the same place, but Kemi Badenoch told Sky News yesterday that she wants it to stay. She thinks that is a fair thing. Very, very interesting, especially when we look at the polls and see where everybody is. Now, of course, these move around all the time and different polling companies are perhaps more reliable than others. But if you look at YouGov, which is a reliable polling company, just in the last few days, they polled and said that Reform UK at 29%, Labour at 22%, and the Conservatives at 16 behind the Liberal Democrats on 17. So a very interesting political place that we're in at the moment. And Nigel Farage giving a big speech tomorrow. The Prime Minister, of course, will want to seize the momentum and talk about housing this week as well. That's what Labour wants us to all to be talking about. Let's talk to John McTernan. He's a former advisor to Tony Blair. John, you're very welcome to the programme this afternoon. How are you?
I'm good.
This row just about, well, 2 things really. One, the winter fuel allowance and the 2-child benefit cap. What's your position on these 2 benefits? What do you think Keir Starmer should do?
Look, I think now it's inevitable that he has to reverse the cut to the winter fuel payment. It's become such an iconic policy of the government, iconic misstep really. There was an error to limit it so tightly. When they did that, it was an error, I think, to announce it in July, 4 months away from the budget, so had no context. And it's been so decisively rejected at the ballot box. If the Labour Party, Labour government don't change, it will be very damaging for them. It's becoming part of the Labour brand, that Labour have attacked pensioners, and you can't sustain that. On the 2-child limit, it's an immoral policy. It should have been lifted as soon as Labour came into office, and the sooner it gets lifted, the better.
Why do you believe it's immoral, John? Some people would say the counter-argument always is, of course, the government should support you if you have up to 2 children, but having further children, that's a financial choice. For some people, of course, some people, it's something they haven't planned, of course. But why do you call it immoral? What's your thinking on that?
It's immoral because it's a policy which says that a child, when born, gets punished with poverty because of an action of its parents. It's clearly immoral to punish children for the actions of their parents. It's utterly outrageous.
3.5 billion we're told to reverse the 2-child benefit cap, around 1.5 billion to change the winter fuel allowance. We're told time and time again, 22 billion black hole. Many people disagree with that, but Rachel Reeves certainly thinks it's there, and so does Keir Starmer. 5 billion quid is something we don't have. Will taxes have to rise in the budget, do you think?
I think we could tax the banks, get 5 billion off them. That would be a decent way to get it. And I think most people would agree that taking something from the banks and giving it to children and to pensioners would be a fair thing. It wouldn't break the Labour Party manifesto pledge, wouldn't break the fiscal rules. There's definitely more than one way to find money to do this, as Angela Rayner set out in her really useful memo about tax. You
very reasonably a minute ago talked about the winter fuel allowance, saying that it's something, that had no context and happened. It was one of the first things that Labour did. If you have Rachel Reeves standing there at the budget in the autumn time saying we're going to reverse this policy, that's very embarrassing, not just for Labour as a whole, but also for her to say, her context when she gave us the context at the budget last year was that there just wasn't enough money and these sacrifices had to be made. What do you make of her position? Because there is some speculation about that at the moment.
Look, I think in politics, there's times when if you don't bend, you break. And this is a time for the government as a whole to bend. It's time for Rachel, on behalf of the government, to say, look, we made a mistake. We're going to do this better this time. We're going to, we're going to give it to everybody and tax it away, or we're going to find a way to link it to the lower bands of council tax, find some way to link it to a reasonable and a fair way of distributing it. But I think, you have to acknowledge something went wrong. And that's a strong politician who does that. It's only weak politicians who pretend that nothing ever happened. And, look at the damage done to the Conservative Party by the refusal to accept until too late that the poll tax was a bad mistake.
Yeah. Is this Keir Starmer's poll tax moment with the winter fuel allowance? No,
it's not. It is not a poll tax moment. It's an emblem. There's no doubt it's an emblem of people's anger at the Labour Party for when they voted for change not getting the change they wanted, which was improved public services, instead getting a change which is, it seems as though, at times it seems as though the government's changes are all about cutting welfare, and nobody ever voted Labour to cut the welfare state. They always vote Labour to increase the size of the welfare state.
Two recent polls, Westminster Voting Intention, YouGov polling, putting Labour at 22%. Another for Nowcast, which is a polling company some people think is brilliant, some think is less brilliant, 22.3, consistent with that. With those two polls, and there is a trend here as well, you have the government fairly consistently about 10 percentage points lower than what they came in with less than a year ago. That is not a good thing for Keir Starmer. How does he get the momentum back if he can, especially in the face of what Nigel Farage is likely to say this week?
Well, first, you have to actually repair the damage that you've done and that people think is wrong. So you have to do that. You have to rebuild trust. You have to rebuild trust by doing the things that people want. So you do actually have to cut the waiting lists in hospitals. You do actually have to build some of the homes that we need. You do have to you do things like the government's doing, which is legislating for renters' rights, legislating for workers' rights.
Is that getting through, John? Are those?
Well,
things...
that's so that for me. That's the thing, which is that we should be prouder about all of the left-wing things we've done. We've nationalised the railways. We're saying that we'll nationalise the steel industry. We've increased the national minimum wage. We should be shouting those things from the rooftop. And the reason why is because if you examine the policy positions that Nigel Farage is taking at the moment, every single one of them is an attempt to steal Labour's clothes. He wants to bring back the winter fuel allowance. He wants to lift the two-child benefit limit. He wears union badges. He says he would nationalise the steel industry. So you've got him trying to occupy Labour, to classic Labour territory. Well, Labour should go, no, that's us. That's for us. And we welcome the flattery of reform, realising that the only viable political platform in the UK at the moment is a left-of-centre one. But that's ours. It's our property. It was in our manifesto.
But can they get it, especially if Nigel Farage is saying, come with me, Keir Starmer, to a working men's club, we'll see he'll get a better reception. I mean, you know and I know, John, that Nigel Farage would get a much better reception than Keir Starmer at many working men's clubs in this country.
Look, I had a taxi driver once back from a TV studio, and I was talking to him about Keir Starmer, and he's going, that man knows his football. I think football's a great connection between Keir and most ordinary voters. I reckon if Keir went around the country, he should go around the country having five-a-side football matches against Nigel Farage and the team he picks at a working man's club. Because Keir plays five-a-side football regularly. Keir talks about football regularly. Keir understands that. But the real thing, if I was Keir, I'd be saying, do you know what? Nigel, you can tour the country with my deputy, Angela Rayner, and let's see who goes down the best, Angela or you. But
surely that would be an admission that Keir Starmer is out of touch, as many people see it. He is someone who maybe he can talk about.
No, it's a point that you have a deputy for a reason. While you're doing international events, while you're doing the EU treaty or the India treaty or the US treaty, while you're doing strengthening NATO, while you're doing whatever negotiations are going in Europe about supporting Ukraine, while you're doing those things, you have a deputy who's more than capable of going around the country and just saying, like, who wants to be on my team? And I think most people would love to see Angela touring, telling our stories, telling our policies, getting out there, being the voice of the Labour Party.
But that point you make is a good one in regard to Keir Starmer being certainly an international statesman. There's no doubt that he has spent a lot of time at these things, and of course many of them are unavoidable. I'm not arguing that for a second. You've got to do them as Prime Minister, but leading to many of our viewers and listeners feeling that his focus actually isn't on this country, it's being on a statesman abroad. It's the line of never hear Keir, in that he's always away at something and not focusing on what many people see as the day-to-day job, making the lives of British people better.
Look, it's always going to be fun for people to make rhymes with Keir's name because it rhymes with so many things. But the truth is, maybe he should be called Austin or something, something that would be less rhymeable. But hey,
Purple Starmer, Orange Starmer,
the Harold Starmer. The point about a Prime Minister and a governor, Prime Minister who's the head of a government, is you've got a cabinet. You've got 22 people sitting around the cabinet table, all of whom can stand in for you, as Nick Thomas-Symonds has done on the media, as a whole range of people, West Streeting. They can give different voices, different faces. The problem that Farage has at the moment is, because his parliamentary party is only five MPs strong, he's got to be the only voice. Who is his Shadow Treasurer, Shadow Secretary of State for Education, Shadow Chancellor, all of these things, to get the strength of policy offer that you need for reform to genuinely displace the Tories, which I think they are on track to do that. But to fully replace the Tories, they're going to have what's their policy on prisons, on probation, all kinds of things which actually take a lot of thinking and take individuals. One person, however great a leader, can't think through everything. So I think if Keir's having a strategy towards reform, he is making a choice between Labour and reform, him and Farage, but he needs to make a choice between his team, his individual team members, and who's going to match up to them. You either have to run Farage ragged, matching up to each of the cabinet members, or he has to find a way to appoint people as spokespeople who are not necessarily in the House of Commons. So you're starting to test his thinking, because if he's an alternative government, if he is the official opposition, the unofficial opposition, but the opposition all but name, then he needs to be subject to the same tests that the opposition get, and some of the pressures that Kemi Badenoch is put under and doesn't respond well to. Nigel and his team need to be put under too. Well, what is the detail? How would you pay for that? How would you manage that? Who would be in charge of that?
Plenty of questions for reform. We'll continue to ask them. Thanks for that interview. We'll call you perhaps nearly gone John. John McTernan there. Thank you very much indeed for that interview. That's John McTernan, who is a former advisor to Tony Blair. Appreciate that. Lots of people getting in touch on all sorts of issues. Pubs, Sharon says, £10 a pint is so out of reach. The working class just not got the money anymore for pubs. It is so sad. I tell you something, I'm a Diet Coke drinker, as you know, and it's fairly hefty as well. Of course, all these nighttime industries, many of these pubs have to, the minimum wage has gone up. For example, rates and prices and so many things, and of course that's passed on to so many of us as consumers as well. Stuart in Perthshire says, "Good afternoon, Peter. I have to admit I haven't been in a pub this century, but I live the life of a recluse now, so it wouldn't be my thing. I think I can buy a bottle of reasonable wine for about the same as a pub would charge for a glass of it, but I do think it's a shame that our pubs are closing at such a rate, yet another part of our culture being eroded." We're going to talk about that later on, Stuart. It is an interesting conversation, and even if you haven't been to a pub recently, I expect you'll want to hear it. I hope so anyway. Colleen says, "Isn't it amazing how when winter fuel allowance was removed, Labour activists were going around saying how well off pensioners were, and it's the right thing to do. Now there's about to be a U-turn. It was a misstep." No, it's the fear of Reform UK, says Colleen. And Brad in Cambridge says, "Personally, I think child benefit after the first 2 children should be paid in the form of tokens for certain products such as school uniforms, baby food, etc. We all know people who misspend this money," says Brad. Lots to talk about in this programme. Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. The White House has sent over monitors to this country to pressure Starmer over the Lucy Connelly case. A very, very interesting one about free speech, about what she should have said, about what the Americans think of this. J.D. Vance, of course, the Vice President, he's been very critical of what has happened in this country previously. Candice Holsworth is going to join us in just a second to let us know her thoughts on that. And I want yours too, of course. 0344 499 1000.
has, exactly as you've described, been played by Putin all along. But that doesn't mean that even though maybe he's a little frustrated, he's going to do anything. I will be convinced when he starts unlocking the resources for Ukraine, especially air defense, to protect innocent people from being killed, and also all the economic tools and leverage that he has. I mean, working with our European allies could shut down Russia's ability to export oil and gas.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, it's really interesting that the Trump administration has sent over monitors to the UK to think about free speech in this country. It's pressuring Keir Starmer over the Lucy Connelly case. I expect you'll be familiar with this, but just in case you aren't, this is the mother who had tweeted on X, on Twitter, of course, mass deportation now, set fire to all the effing hotels full of the bees. For all I care, while you're at it, take the Treasurer, government, politicians with them. I feel physically sick knowing what the Southport families will now have to endure. This was in the wake of those horrendous attacks that involved the murders of 3 young children. If that makes me a racist, so be it. Well, she took it down a few hours later, but she's currently serving a sentence of 31 months. She'll be out in August, having served about 40% of that. Ray Connelly, Lucy Connelly's husband, spoke to Kevin O'Sullivan last week about the impact this prison sentence is having on their teenage daughter.
We're not too bad. We're a good little team, but obviously this is probably knocked my daughter a little bit. So what I've done, because she's got bad anxiety anyway, and she kept saying, "Oh, when's Mummy's letter coming? When's Mummy's letter coming?" And I said, "Look, we're just waiting now." And obviously she said, "How did it all go?" And I said, "Pretty good. I'm confident. I reckon. I think we're going to go, and I think we have a good chance." But I was mindful. I said, "But if not, we're going to see her Sunday. We're going to go to a family day. Then it's only a couple of months away, and she'll be here and whatever." But she'll be thinking she'll be missing my 13th birthday with the date I gave her. But what I've done is I've sent her to live with Lucy's mum, because she's been really having a real tough time. So I've sent her to go and live with Lucy's mum, with Lucy and Lucy's sisters there, just to give her a little bit more support, because she has really been struggling.
That's Ray Connelly speaking to Kevin O'Sullivan last week. Ray Connelly, of course, the husband of Lucy Connelly, talking about the impact this has had on his family. And judges threw out an appeal by Lucy Connelly last week, meaning she will not be released before August at the earliest. And now State Department officials from the Trump administration examining the treatment of Lucy Connelly, who was jailed for 31 months over that social media post. Let's speak to Candice Holdsworth about that. She's a writer and broadcaster. Candice, I know you've been following this very closely. What do you think about the fact that the Trump administration is actually sending people over to have a look at this, to monitor this, and this, what many people see as a really big attack, not just on free speech, but on proportionality when it comes to dealing with things that people put online? Now, I think she shouldn't have put it online. I think it was wrong to do so, but she should have been given a slap in the wrist, a talking to, or at the most a caution, certainly not a custodial sentence.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that it was vile, but the punishment doesn't fit the crime, and I think everybody's picked up on this, and I've been interested to see people across the political spectrum say that. People I know to be very left-wing and, would find statements like that just beyond the pale. They've said she doesn't deserve a prison sentence. In terms of the US State Department taking an interest in it, I find this fascinating. And, just anecdotally, people I speak to, opinions very mixed. Because, there are a lot of people who don't like the US meddling in our affairs. They're like, no, we're a sovereign country. We sort these issues out ourselves. Come the next election, we should be able to voice our displeasure at whatever's going on. But then there are others who say, but actually, maybe being a good ally is saying to us when we've gone astray. And I think the US does have a particular interest in this because from what we know, J.D. Vance has raised the issue of the Online Safety Act. You know, he said it in that televised press conference with Keir Starmer, who sort of brushed it off and didn't want to talk about it. They don't like that US tech companies could be liable for enormous fines as laid out in the Online Safety Act. You know, I'm not saying that the tech companies have a perfect track record. I mean, look at what happened during COVID. They shut down lots of speech. They said they were under pressure from the Biden White House to do so, but now they really want to move away from it. So this administration seems to be taking an incredibly muscular attitude to free speech. And, you know, we're not the only country having this discussion. Look at what's going on in South Africa now. I suppose the question is they can raise the issue, they can send people to monitor it, but practically, policy-wise, what can they do? Yeah. I suppose in future free trade deal negotiations, because they haven't signed a full free trade deal yet, they could, as a concession, they could say, would you repeal the Online Safety Act? I don't know how that would go down here because, I mean, that was something that was debated in Parliament and passed by Parliament. Could you have, you know, another country saying bypass all that? You know, I mean, I don't know how that works practically, right? But I think a discussion of values possibly is good because at the moment, change seems to be moving at a glacial pace. And I think many of the ruling elites in this country have just ridden roughshod over free speech.
It's really interesting what some of our viewers and listeners are saying. Andy says, why does a foreign government understand the Lucy Connelly fiasco, but Sir Traitor Starmer, as Andy calls him, hasn't got a clue, as he stated? Sue in Cambridge says, I'm so pleased Trump is doing this. And certainly we haven't been as pleased when, for example, Obama said that the UK would be at the back of the queue when it came to Brexit negotiations. Now we have a trade deal a number of years later. Certainly in regard to Lucy Connelly, it is so clear for so many people, both at home and abroad, that this is a two-tier justice, and it's certainly a very, very strong and too muscular sentence for her to be in prison, especially when other cases are looked at. And I just wonder what effect you think this will have necessarily, because the courts have said the appeal has been thrown out. You know, she's not getting out until at least August, and that's the way things are. Or is it just good, I suppose, in the longer term when inevitably there's another case that is similar to this one?
I think what this should invite scrutiny of is the sentencing guidelines, you know, as laid out by the Sentencing Council, because I think what a lot of people were shocked to discover with the Lucy Connelly case was just how harsh a punishment you could get for tweeting something. So, I mean, she didn't get the full 7 years, but she could have. She got a discount on her sentence because she pled guilty. Maybe that wasn't the right thing to do. But I think most ordinary people would look at that and say, no, you know, the people who devised these laws have gone far astray of what ordinary people think is a just punishment, measure for measure. You know, the punishment should fit the crime. And I think that there is so little scrutiny of the people who make these laws. You know, you look at what the Sentencing Council tried to propose earlier this year, some DEI version.
Yep. Outrageous. And in fairness to Shabnam Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, she clamped down on that. It'll be interesting to see where this leads. No doubt we will talk about it more. Candace Holdsworth, writer and broadcaster, thank you for joining us on Talk Today. Colin has been in touch and says, have you had any calls who have said Lucy Connelly deserves the jail sentence as fished out? No, Colin, not a single one. I mean, I can't speak for my other my fellow presenters in this station, but I don't think there's a single person who we've had a punter anyway, maybe a guest or two, I don't know, but certainly not people texting, tweeting, voice noting who believe that it's fair. Yes, Sue in Cambridge, thanks for your thoughts on doing the story. William is in London and has given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. William, you're very welcome to the programme. I think you've rung to tell me I told you so.
Oh, thank you for taking my call, Peter. Haven't heard from John McTernan for a little while. I thought he was one of the millionaires that had left the country.
Right. I'm not sure he's a millionaire, but certainly he is.
Of course he is. What, working for Tony Blair, Alistair Campbell and that little crew? Think about it, Peter. Thank you. Right, Peter, I phoned you last year saying to you, Keir Starmer would not last a year as Prime Minister after the Tom from Sunderland speech about the Starmer riots, the far-right Starmer riots. Do you remember, Peter?
It's, in the words of Celine Dion, it's all coming back to me now, William.
Remember I said he would stop free speech for a lot of people?
Yeah.
And this is exactly what he's done. I'm an electrician, Peter. I know, profit or anything like that, but I could tell what he was going to do. He's always out the country. He's never in the country. The problems we've got in Britain are just unbelievable. Where I live in, London, Croydon, is absolutely a no-go area. But anyway, I did say to you that he wouldn't last long, and hopefully he will be out by August.
Do you think he won't last a year? It was the 4th of July that he came in as Prime Minister, and we've got just over a month till then. Do you still think he'll be gone by then, William?
Peter, please tell me and all the British public, what has he done right? What has this Labour Party done right so far?
Not a huge amount is the answer.
Pardon?
Not a huge amount is the answer.
They've made mistake after mistake. They've taken money away from OAPs. They've stopped, the PIP payments. They've signed away the Brexit, the 17.4 million people that voted for Brexit. They're ruining our farmers. We've got mass immigration, uncontrolled immigration, Peter. Where are these people coming from? Why are we paying out billions for them and our own people have got nothing? It's ridiculous.
They're all of those things are absolutely fair questions, William. I think he will last the year. I think he will probably last till 2029. But listen, we'll see what happens, William, and thanks for your call. I appreciate that. Laurie in Streatham, also in London, South London, says your last guest, John McTernan, talked about Starmer playing five-a-side football as a comparison to the reaction that Starmer and Farage may receive in a working man's club. What total cobblers? Where's the comparison? And you let him get away with it. Not so much get away with it, it's just a suggestion. And in fairness, Starmer does play five-a-side football. The thing is, during a five-a-side football match, not that I've played too many of them in my time, you don't tend to have a conversation. You don't tend to ask people, what do you think? What should I do as Prime Minister? What do you think of my record as Prime Minister? It tends to be a silent thing where you will, of course, yelp and scream and when you've scored a goal or you're kicked over or whatever, but it's not a conversation. I think Farage he connects as a politician. Whether you love him or loathe him, he connects with people. So what do you think the conversation would be down the working men's club if Keir Starmer came in? It's a very interesting discussion there, and I thought the suggestion by John McTernan was okay, Laurie. I don't think it's a matter of me jumping down his throat and saying, no, you can't say that. Paul Barnes in Cornwall says, why on earth do you have a former advisor to Tony Blair on your show? He was obviously no good then and no good now, says Paul. Well, John McTernan worked in Downing Street for Tony Blair. I think he's entitled to his opinion. We are the home of free speech, and we speak to people all the time who we disagree with. Maybe you disagree with me, maybe you think I'm talking nonsense. Give me a ring and tell me why. 0344 499 1000. In just a second, we're going to talk about a possible ceasefire in the Middle East, but Israel already seems to have rejected it. Lots still happening there on a daily basis. An expert, a former chief reporter from the Jewish Chronicle, Kirsty Buchanan, will be in the studio in just a second.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, we keep a keen eye, of course, at this station and what's happening in the Middle East. It is the biggest international story and, of course, how it affects us here in the UK. So much anti-Semitism about so many of those pro-Palestinian protesters and lots of people who feel very, very strongly about what happens there. and there was a mooted ceasefire this afternoon. Hamas suggested it. It's been rejected by Israel. We'll find out why in a second. And at least 54 Palestinians have been killed, according to Hamas officials. And we're always a little bit sceptical about that, but clearly there are casualties. 54 Palestinians have been killed, most of them in a school building, sheltering displaced families during an Israeli airstrike on Gaza overnight. Things are pretty desperate there, and I want to talk through the situation from our perspective here in the UK with Kirsty Buchanan, who's a former chief reporter at the Jewish Chronicle. She's also a former number 10 advisor, many strings to her bow. Kirsty, another attack that many people will see and condemn. What do we sort of know about what's happening in Gaza? Of course, many reporters can't get in there because Israel and Egypt won't let them in. But clearly a desperate humanitarian situation. Could there be some hope of a ceasefire coming?
Well, we've had a lot of false dawns in terms of a ceasefire, and we have this sort of stalemate that's kind of, one way or another, has lasted since the last ceasefire ended on March the 2nd. So, in essence, what Israel is requiring is Hamas to hand over the 58 remaining hostages, both those who are alive and the bodies of those who have been killed in captivity, and also they want the surrender of Hamas, and they are suggesting actually that they exile rather than surrender and stay in situ. And Hamas is saying in its turn, we will not do that until we have a complete Israeli withdrawal from the Strip. So this has held. The other issue, of course, is this growing humanitarian crisis, this crisis of a shortage of food and medical supplies for the people of Gaza. There's 2.1 million people living on that strip. And what we saw over the course of that ceasefire was, I think, 1.7 million tonnes worth of aid and medical supplies getting in. 600 vehicles a day were coming over that border to provide food and medical supplies. And of course, once that finished, that was supposed to hold fast for 4 months. And you don't have to take Israel's word for that. That's according to the United Nations. Their own estimates was that was enough aid to take the people of Gaza through to July. So the big question is, why are we where we are now?
Where's the aid gone?
Where has the aid gone?
And we know the answer, don't we, Kirsty?
Yeah, and the Israel Defence Force says, look, what is happening is that aid is being stolen by Hamas. Those trucks are being held up. There was a report just today from an Emirati agency. 24 trucks have gone in, 23 of them have been plundered by Hamas. That aid then goes into the tunnels. Some of it is used to feed their own fighters, and the rest of it is sold back to the Palestinian people at hugely inflated prices. So what Israel has been working on with America is an alternative aid distribution system, one that will prevent all that aid going into Hamas's hands and lining Hamas's pockets. And that was to set up an independent aid organisation called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. It's going to set up 4 distribution centres, originally in the south, but eventually that might roll out to the north. And it's not perfect at the moment. That will only be able to supply aid and food to 60% of the population. It will be staffed by aid workers working through the foundation. It won't be staffed by Israeli, Defence Force military. The perimeter will be secured by contractors, the same contractors that we used to create the ceasefire conditions on the ground in Gaza. And Israel will have no role in either the security of those distribution centres or the handing out of aid. And so what we've actually seen is that proposal, which is days away from beginning to be rolled out, hasn't come fast enough on the ground for the humanitarian crisis. So last week Israel bowed to international pressure and allowed some of the existing aid trucks in. So I think so far we've had 300 aid trucks coming in over the border. Is that enough for the scale of the crisis at the moment? No, it is not.
We always have Israel blamed all the time, but Hamas is the true villain here, are they not? Certainly when it comes to aid. I just wonder, given the proposal of the ceasefire, so many people will say, well, Hamas has proposed a ceasefire. Steve Witkoff, the US Special Envoy, says, here's an idea, and Israel have rejected that. Clearly the international sentiment is going to be against Israel again on that. Why do you think they've rejected this idea?
Well, presumably because Hamas isn't meeting their central demands, which is to return the hostages immediately. And this is Israel's argument all the way through this 19 months of this conflict. They have always and repeatedly said this conflict can end at any point. All it requires is for Hamas to hand over the hostages, the people that it kidnapped in that terrible massacre on October the 7th, and it's held in tunnels and tortured and starved, hand them over and surrender, and then we will have a ceasefire.
Let's talk a little bit about a couple of other foreign affairs stories, Kirsty, that I know you have a great level of expertise in all sorts of things, but certainly foreign affairs stories. We know that there's been an interesting discussion anyway. Everyone is emotional, says the Kremlin, after Trump has called Putin absolutely crazy. A sort of fascinating two very, very strong personalities, two dominant personalities who've gone through a weird kind of relationship, symbiotic, of course, but Trump and Putin clearly not seeing eye to eye just at the moment.
Yeah, look, it's fascinating, isn't it? This complete eruption of emotion from the president, who you sense that kind of pent-up frustration week after week after week from a US president who said, look, I can get peace in Ukraine within 24 hours of me becoming the president. And here we are, month after month after month. And finally, it seems that frustration has boiled over for Donald Trump, and he is beginning to say the sorts of things that the rest of us have known for a very long time. That Putin is playing for time, and he's playing Donald Trump for a fool. And I think there's a certain amount of personal slight in that. I think he felt that they were in some way friends, and that he would respond and respect what Donald Trump was asking of him. But the rest of us can see what has been going on here, which is simply that Russia has been trying to bide time to get the right conditions to acquire as much of that land as it can. It already has occupied probably about a fifth of Ukraine, and to get the conditions that if Trump does walk away, which he has threatened to do from time to time, that actually we're now past that kind of the difficult period, and we're into the potential for a new spring offensive where the ground is harder and it's easier for Russia to move on. So actually, either way, we've seen, Russia playing for time. Trump's been warned again and again and again that this is what happened, and it seems finally that frustration has bubbled out into that sort of really heartfelt criticisms that we saw him level at Putin's door today. It's
fascinating and changes almost every day. One relationship I think we thought was sort of fairly okay was Emmanuel Macron and his wife, but we've seen some bizarre footage today. I think we can show this actually on the screen. I'll describe it to people who are listening on the radio, of course. And it's a plane door being open of the French president's plane, and then it sort of there's a sort of a zooming in on what happens, and what you see is Emmanuel Macron standing there, and then his wife pushes his face away in what appears to be not a friendly way. He is very briefly realises that the cameras are on him and waves. Doesn't look massively amused, but his wife clearly not massively happy there. That's been explained away as a bit of a jape, but certainly there will be questions asked about this, Kirsty. What do you make of it? Yeah,
it doesn't look very japey to me, does it? Look, it's been described as a slap. It's not a slap, is it? It's proper,
It's a push.
A push in the face.
You can't really imagine Sir Philip May doing that to Theresa May as they're about to get off a plane.
Absolutely not. Look, the only thing I can say, and who knows, look, couples argue all of the time. Sometimes frustration boils over. Anyone that's ever gone on holiday with someone knows that, travelling abroad can add extra strain to a trip. Maybe that's what we've seen here. I mean, I don't think it's anything more than sort of slightly embarrassing for them. But yes, the thing that makes me laugh when I watch the clip again is exactly what you said. You can see Macron seeing that the cameras are on him and sort of embarrassingly waving. Nothing
marvellous.
to see here.
Hello,
move along. But yes, it is rather embarrassing. But in defence of Mrs. Macron, it's a long old trip to the Far East, right? So maybe she was just tired and a bit emotional.
Thank you, Kirsty. That's Kirsty Buchanan there, former chief reporter at the Jewish Chronicle and a former advisor at 10 Downing Street, bringing us up to date with all the latest foreign affairs stories. What do you think about this? What do you think about a possible ceasefire in the Middle East? Should it happen? Was Israel right to reject it? Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. And thanks to everybody who's been in touch on this idea of John McTernan's. He spoke earlier and suggested that Keir Starmer not go to a working men's club but play five-a-side with people. Dan says, Peter, I'd love to know who plays five-a-side with Starmer. It's clearly not the public, says Dan in Hartlepool. Well, he is a big fan of five-a-side. Apparently he does it every week. Kirsty, actually, maybe I could ask you, if you were advising Keir Starmer, would you say go to the working men's club with Nigel Farage, or would you say play five-a-side with people, or how would you get him to connect with the man on the street?
Well,
woman?
I think that trying to play football is about the same as trying to out Farage. In terms of policies and matching policies, I would stick away from that if I were him.
Yeah.
And look, I don't know what his football's like, but I would stay away from the working men's club.
It's also knowing your strengths as well. I mean, Tony Blair, of course, was quite good at football. We remember that famous footage of him heading the ball with, was it Kevin Keegan? I think he was heading the ball, and clearly he could do it. But when, if you're Gordon Brown or something like that, I mean, just stay away from it.
The potential photo opportunity disasters there are just too much.
We remember Boris Johnson, the rugby tackling a child as well.
Rugby tackling, getting stuck on that. Do you remember when he did the zip wire?
Yes.
I think for the Olympics, and got stuck halfway along with his little two flags.
Yes, never great. But of course, Boris Johnson, being Boris Johnson, got away with it in a way that no one else could have. Louise has been in touch and says it was funny John said take Angela Rayner with Farage. In other words, he knows what reception Keith would get. I always find it mildly amusing when people refer to Keir Starmer as Keith. It's not really slagging him off, but it's sort of interesting. Anyway, Nigel isn't working class at all, but he is a common man and loves this country and is never arrogant. Louise, very interesting you should mention that. In terms of politicians who really connect with people, I would argue in my political lifetime, 5 of them only: Tony Blair, Bill Clinton, Nigel Farage, Boris Johnson, and of course Donald Trump. That's what I would argue. If you've any other thoughts on that, any others who would you think connect, let me know. Kirsty?
Mo Molam, she definitely had
good point. Very good point. Very good point.
The touch of the common man about her as well.
Of course, yeah. The stories of her suffering from cancer and getting really frustrated with people in Northern Ireland, just taking off her wig and throwing it on the desk and saying, we've got to get through this. No, Mo Molam was. And of course, she became a danger to Tony Blair when she got a standing ovation when he was giving his conference speech, and that was the beginning of the end of her career, because she was a threat to Tony Blair as well. It's fascinating. Kirsty, thank you. We've got some bonus thoughts from you there, which is great. Lots of people getting in touch on Lucy Connelly as well. Gary says, I'm not quite sure why so many listeners to talk, and indeed so many presenters, think Lucy Connelly is hard done by and is even a political prisoner. She pleaded guilty to an offence that carries a minimum term of 3 years in prison. What else could the courts do? By all means, campaign for the law to be changed if you think that's harsh, but you can't campaign for her to be released from her sentence, because that's what the law says when she committed the offence. Roberta says, good afternoon, Peter. Regarding Lucy Connelly and her prison sentence, I feel Lucy should not be in prison. We have other criminals walking around the countryside when they should be in prison, and yet they are free, but Lucy is being made into a scapegoat for doing a tweet with some hurty words. There are some petitions on a petition site, so if people are not happy with the situation, they should sign them. I'm far from happy, so I've signed them all, says Roberta. Well, thank you for that. That debate, of course, continues. We're also going to talk in just a second about the scandal of the fat cats on the first ever NHS rich list. Nearly 300 health bosses handed packages of over more than £200,000, given the crisis in the healthcare sector and in the NHS. Should they be paid that money, or maybe we should pay that money for the best people? Let me know what you think. 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
has, exactly as you've described, been played by Putin all along. But that doesn't mean that even though maybe he's a little frustrated, he's going to do anything. I will be convinced when he starts unlocking the resources for Ukraine, especially air defense, to protect innocent people from being killed, and also all the economic tools and leverage that he has. I mean, working with our European allies could shut down Russia's ability to export oil and gas.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to everybody who has been in touch, including Brad, who says, I wonder if your guest would call Macron's push just a tiff if the push had been the other way around and it had been Macron pushing his wife. To be fair to the Prime Minister, says Jane, he doesn't know anything about football, running this country. He doesn't know anything, says Jane. John says, amazing the double standards that rear their ugly head when a man is pushed or hit. If this was the other way around, there would rightly be uproar, says John in Nottingham. I am shocked, says this person. Are you really excusing the incidents of domestic violence on Macron as fine as his wife has just been travelling on a plane she put hands on, and that is never excusable? Well, we will show it just one more time for those people who are watching. This is Brigitte Macron, his wife, pushing Macron on his face. He doesn't look too happy about that. He's just arrived in the Far East and she is clearly not too happy. Pushing him. It's been explained away by the French, by the Élysée Palace. He realises very quickly he is being seen and waves and then moves in her direction. It'll be interesting to see whether we get the full story about that. That is in Hanoi in Vietnam yesterday, I should say. And this footage, what do you think of it? Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. In regard to Starmer and five-a-side football, Graham says Starmer will be very difficult to play football against. He starts out in the centre, then he moves to the left wing, and then in order to play against Reform, he tries to go to the right wing before he is eventually substituted, says Graham and Bushy. Very witty. Karen's been in touch on the Gaza ceasefire proposal with a voice note.
I don't think Israel should agree to a ceasefire. Israel are the only ones between us and Hamas, and they are fighting this fight on behalf of the rest of the world, and we owe them a huge debt. I believe that Israel has the right to defend herself, and war is ugly and war is terrible on both sides. However, you have to stand up to a tyrant and a terrorist organisation, and they have to be wiped out. So I stand with Israel.
Thank you, Karen. Much appreciated. We'll talk more about that as the programme goes on, but I want to talk about the scandal of fat cats now. In the first ever NHS Rich List, nearly 300 health bosses handed packages worth over £200,000. Now, waiting lists are coming down to some degree, although a lot of people don't feel that is happening to them anyway. Martin Gower is a former NHS Trust chairman. Martin, should we pay NHS staff, even those who are in senior positions, perhaps even doing a good job, should we pay them £200,000 more than the Prime Minister?
Well, thank you for having me on, Peter. And I think there are certainly people in the NHS, in NHS Trust, who should be paid that level. I do think the thing about people earning more than the Prime Minister is a bit of a nonsense, because almost certainly, a Prime Minister should be paid a lot more than they are. And except for the present one, who's probably paid a little more than he should be. But actually, I think what you have to look at in the NHS is, if you compare those chief executives to, say, a chief executive in the private sector in a similar situation, the similar number of staff, a similar income, the private sector CEO would get a lot more, especially based on bonuses. Now, we were able, when I was a trust chair up until 2020, we were able to give a remuneration to a CEO that included a bonus. But, and here's the big but, the bonus had really strong control factors on it. Mm-hmm. If the trust had a bad report from the Care Quality Commission about its quality of care, then they'd lose at least 40% and probably 60% of the bonus. If the trust greatly exceeded its budget, it would also have a control factor on that. It would have a control factor on staff turnover, and it would have a control factor on staff culture that's fed back by the staff annual survey of staff attitudes. So the principle of bonusing people, I don't have an issue with. And when it comes to certain hospital trusts, like, for example, the Royal Marsden, which is a world-class cancer hospital, I believe that any similar hospital anywhere in the world, the CEO would be getting at least as much as a CEO of that trust.
Some of these examples, though, East Cheshire NHS Trust paying 8 managers £100,000 or more, despite being the worst performing trust in percentage terms for seeing A&E patients within 4 hours. It saw just 50.6% within the target time, well below the 78% expected. And among the managers was the trust's Director of People and Culture and Deputy CEO, a woman called Rachel Charlton, who raked in £367,500. It does seem an awful lot of money for someone who's clearly not doing a job that is to the standard that is expected.
Peter, this is where the one place on this press story in the Mail that I put a big red line through, or a big red, was the fact that a Director of People and Culture was being paid that level of, because the evidence isn't there that the people and culture aspects of the East Cheshire Trust is doing particularly well. I was horrified by that. I'll be honestly, absolutely frank about it. It's disgraceful, and I don't get it.
But when was the last time, Martin, you heard someone in the public sector getting a pay cut? Certainly the bonus structure and what everything you say I totally agree with, but there are so few people who will not have, who will be sacked or will have any sanction when things go wrong.
Well, the problem is, Peter, that people get sacked and then turn up somewhere else.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
And that's absolutely not right either. But I think it's as with anything in the NHS, this is patchy. There are trusts definitely where there are CEOs who will probably succeed in the private sector. I always look on somebody like an airline CEO. How would they compare to the average NHS trust CEO? And I do also think the Taxpayer Alliance description of the sky-high salaries being for senior bureaucrats, some of them are just bureaucrats. But actually there's quite a number who aren't, and they're quite innovative, and probably for a lot of the time they'd find their way around to how to circumvent NHS England's various edicts they're sent. But actually,
it's half the battle in itself sometimes, although NHS England being abolished, so I'm sure everything will be absolutely fine.
Just to pop up under in another place elsewhere, I suspect. The reality is that there need to be more people at the very top of the NHS who are private sector people by background, who have the agility, the need to innovate, and actually the fact that risk is a high level issue, but it's not about a risk to the reputations of the trust or indeed reputations of the managers. It is a risk to the reputation of patients, or in the case of an airline, clearly to passengers. So I think there's a balance needed here.
Yes.
But and the other thing, of course, is that if you negotiate pay nationally to this huge payroll, then you're inevitably going to have a situation where there are people who are not treated that well.
It's true. We'll just have to leave it there as we're about to go to the news. But many thanks to Martin Gower, former NHS Trust Chair. Stay with it.
Good evening and welcome to Plank of the Week. It's the one show where you do not have to be worried about judgmental people because we'll do all the judging for you. Let's just have a look at how Humphrey Useless is now spending his time.
There goes your career, mate.
Over there a bit is over towards where all the migrants come in. He's jumping there. There he goes. He goes over the bar.
Hello,
and
lady.
Unfortunately, it catches on his Johnson.
If he's plank of the week, he's got a sizable plank.
That's a whole different show.
Plank of the Week, Fridays at 7 on Talk.
Hi, I'm Kevin O'Sullivan, and I've got a message for you. Welcome back to this blockbuster edition of What Just Happened. It really is a good one, I think. It's so funny that people keep calling me Mega.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good evening, this is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company. I'll be here between now and 7, and indeed between 4 and 7 every day this week. There's loads to discuss. We should all calm down, according to Emmanuel Macron, when his wife pushed him on a plane, pushed his face on a plane. What do you think about that? Extraordinary footage. We'll show it to you again in a second. 0344 499 1000. Starmer benefits U-turn to blow $5 billion hole in the budget. He is going to U-turn on winter fuel allowance, we're told. Also scrapping the two-child benefit cap. We'll get the thoughts of Chris Snowdon in a second. Also, Nigel Farage says that Keir Starmer should go to a working men's club to connect with real people. John McTernan, who we spoke to in the last hour, says that Starmer instead should play five-a-side football with people. Not much of a conversation when you're playing football, though. Also, army leaders have been told less shouting, be more David Beckham, be calmer and get things done. Does that include kicking Argentinians? I certainly hope not. Although, you know, well done to our boys in the Falklands War, of course, where they did absolutely kick the Argentinians into touch. Everyone is emotional, says the Kremlin, after Trump calls Putin absolutely crazy. We'll also get a sports update this hour, and we'll talk a little bit later about the sad death of the English pub. Lovely article by Rory Hanrahan. He's Irish himself, actually, but he manages 3 English pubs in Oxfordshire and says it's a real shame that so many of them are going. What do you think about all of that? 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me at 7222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV, follow me at Peter Cardwell, and remember, the main number does 3 things. You can send me a voice note, you can send me a WhatsApp text message, or you can give me a ring. 0344 499 1000. Loads to discuss here on Talk between now and 7. Now then, how can Keir Starmer really connect with real people, the working man? Well, Nigel Farage, he's giving a big speech tomorrow saying how he will do that. He's also giving a lot of detail about what he wants to do, for example, scrapping the two-child benefit cap. Well, he has said that Keir Starmer should come with him to a working men's club and see how they get on. I would be very surprised if Keir Starmer is welcomed as much as Nigel Farage has. But it really illustrates, I suppose, the point that Reform UK is seen as, and arguably is, more in touch with working people, men and women, ordinary people, Joe Public, than Keir Starmer is. And I wonder what you think about that. Maybe you want Keir Starmer to come to your local pub so you can have a chat with him, or your local working men's club. Maybe Angela Rayner would be better, or maybe just Nigel Farage should pop in. What do you think? 0344 499 1000. Chris Snowdon is Head of Lifestyle Economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Chris, let's talk about that, the substantive stuff in regard to the two-child benefit cap and the economic bits in just a second. But in terms of relatability, in terms of just actually chatting to people, getting outside of the London bubble, making sure that real people who are outside London, who have jobs and work and have all sorts of different priorities in life other than perhaps human rights lawyers in Islington do. Who do you think's better at this, and why do you think they're better? Farage or Starmer, or maybe other politicians?
Well, clearly it's Farage. I mean, I think most people, even his critics, would agree that he does have an unusually good common touch. But it also, of course, helps that he's never had any real responsibility. You know, it's easy to be more popular when you've never actually done anything to annoy anybody in terms of actual policy making, whereas Keir Starmer, of course, has done things like this winter fuel allowance cut and the two-child benefit cap, which do rub people up the wrong way. I dare say if Farage ever became Prime Minister, he would have to make some tough decisions of his own.
It's interesting, Number 10 has said Nigel Farage can pose as a man of the people all he likes, but his record speaks for itself, fawning over Putin, opposing employment rights and proposing the abolition of the NHS. I don't think Nigel Farage has actually really done any of that, but well, he certainly opposed the employment rights bill that Labour had, but it doesn't mean he imposes employment rights. Anyway, let's talk about the substantive issues and Reform's sort of leftward move. It is quite a weird thing to have Nigel Farage and Keir Starmer in the same position, certainly on the two-child benefit cap, whereas Kemi Badenoch, for example, says the cap should stay. But just on that issue, on the two-child benefit cap, what do you think of it as a policy, Chris, and why?
I agree with Kemi Badenoch on this one, and I'm glad that she's had the the backbone to stand up and say something unpopular. We can't afford these things. And for the Labour Party to slide back on this particular policy and also the winter fuel allowance, I think is extremely worrying. If you look at the very perilous state of the public finances, we can't be borrowing money just to give money to people who've got 2 kids that they can't afford so they can have more kids than they're going to afford, nor can we really be affording to borrow money. And we are talking entirely about borrowing for everything at this point, to give to richer than average pensioners so they can buy cream teas. I'm sorry, I know these things are popular because free stuff always is, but being in power means you've got to recognise trade-offs. And I fear we are really heading towards potential disaster if we carry on pretending that we can afford all this stuff. I thought people had learned the lesson after the mini budget, but apparently not.
It's interesting that John McTernan, who was on earlier on, former advisor to Tony Blair, called the two-child benefit cap immoral, saying that from birth you're discriminating against children. It's not their fault, it's a choice their parents have made, sometimes not a choice, to have a child, and actually children should be treated equally when it comes to the benefit system. What do you make of that argument, Chris?
Well, I don't agree. I don't think we should be incentivising people to have large families if they can't afford it. Of course, people can get pregnant accidentally, but you shouldn't be getting pregnant accidentally 3 or 4 times.
Okay. In regard to the winter fuel allowance, there are many people who want it. The Age UK saying, of course, that about 200,000 people are sort of caught in the middle. I'm not an advocate of people who are, I don't think Alan Sugar absolutely needs the winter fuel allowance, but there are people caught in the middle. Can it be done in a fairer way, do you think, or should we just abolish the whole thing?
Well, I mean, I think politically the sensible thing to do would be to actually bring back the winter fuel allowance for every pensioner and then scrap the triple lock. People resent having things taken away from them, but having something not given to you next year, I think, is maybe politically easy. And it would save a hell of a lot more money than the savings from the winter fuel allowance. Now, the government won't do that either, because if it does, then Farage will stand up and say, I'm going to bring in a quadruple lock, as Rishi Sunak did during the election campaign last year. This is the problem we've got. If we've got politicians who just want to promise things to everybody and everybody wants to get rich from other people, then you will end up, crashing the economy, as Rachel Reeves said when Liz Truss did this kind of thing. The bond markets are in a worse state now than they were at the very peak of the mini budget. There's a reason that Rachel Reeves has these fiscal rules. It's not for fun. It's to try and second guess the bond markets. And the rules that she's got are reasonably sensible insofar as she's only borrowing effectively to pay off the enormous amount of interest that we're paying on the debt of the money that we've been borrowing for the last 25 years. And it's been 25 years since the British government balanced the books. We will head towards trouble just with the price of government borrowing through the bond markets if we carry on giving in to every single issue pressure group asking for a handout.
I wonder if I could ask you about another story that's in the news today, the scandal of fat cats on the first ever NHS rich list. This is the Taxpayers Alliance that have put information or collated information to show that 300 health bosses are handed packages of more than £200,000. Do you think it's right that these people should be paid this amount of money? They are running large organisations after all.
Well, it would be nice if it was in some way related to performance, wouldn't it? I think perhaps some kind of lower salary and healthy bonuses might be the better way to deal with this, and I can't see many bonuses being paid out with the NHS as it is. Look, this in a way, this is related to what we were just talking about. In the government spending, is this going on giving money to people? We're not really investing in things. We're not building things. The public services that we got are mostly pretty awful, not least the NHS. And so we have the highest tax burden in 70 years. Everybody feels as if the country is falling apart, and that is because so much of the money that is we've been taxed is then just redistributed, and it's not even necessarily being redistributed from the rich to the poor. It's just being swished around in this kind of endless revolving door. And we're spending more on the NHS, but only just to pay more to doctors and nurses and to managers. We're not necessarily employing more people, buying more equipment. We have far fewer hospital beds than most countries, far fewer MRI scanners and other pieces of equipment, but we pay the managers a lot of money and there's a huge amount of waste. This is the problem we're dealing with. This is why people are confused, that they feel they're being taxed so heavily and yet nothing seems to work. It's because actually there has been a certain amount of austerity in the sense that crucial public services, particularly at the local level, have been starved of cash, but we've been giving more and more money to pensioners and people with families and people who need the winter, whatever, you know, all these kind of things, plus a bloated public sector, which is doing really well so far out of the Starmer government.
Chris, thank you for that. That's Chris Snowden there, who's Head of Lifestyle Economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Thanks to people who've been in touch on Twitter as well. Joseph Parker says, John McTernan had his head in the sand. The UK will never vote Labour again. Angela says, lovely to have you on Drive. On a left-leaning rival station, they're spitting feathers about Farage, Trump and winter fuel payments just for starters. Even the odd person outraged on talk about Trump and Farage. What is in the water, Peter? Keith says, top marks for keeping a straight face listening to John McTernan. I thought I'd tuned into Plank of the Week. Bob says, the last thing I wanted was to be right about the aid going straight to Hamas, but I think you knew that was an unfortunate inevitability. Why can't those calling for endless aid see this? Well, let's stick with the story on Israel, because John in East London has given me a ring. John, you're very welcome to the programme. I know this is around the subject you want to talk about. Tell us your thoughts.
Israel has a right to defend itself, but they have to win this time. They can't have a ceasefire where they release 20 hostages, maybe 3 at a time, go over another 3 months. Can't go on forever. If this was Britain, and let's say a country, or at least Wales would come over and started taking 200-300 people from England, there'd be the same duty of England as a right to get back their hostages.
Well, I read a really fascinating piece in the Sunday Times yesterday, and if you haven't seen it, perhaps you could look it up online, but really, really interesting about Israel's tactics. And often what they do is they go in, they clear an area of Hamas terrorists, and then they leave it, and they don't sort of secure that area, and then Hamas, of course, comes back. So the military tactics just not working, not being consistent in all of this, and the idea they have at the moment is to bring people into the south of Gaza, to keep them secure, to give them aid, and then to take the fight to Hamas in the north of Gaza. Why they haven't done that previously, I don't know. But I just hadn't seen it explained in that way. And I wonder sometimes if Israel could just explain what it's doing maybe a little bit more, that there would be fewer attacks on it verbally from people saying, well, you hate Palestinians and you're just bombing schools and hospitals. The fact is that Hamas will often set up their headquarters in a lot of those places as well, John.
Absolutely. The Palestinians have always been on the losing side, and they always made themselves out as victims. They're third, fourth, fifth generation people. They can't still be what's the word? I've lost it now.
Refugees?
Refugees, yeah. No other country has refugees, third, fourth, fifth generation.
Yeah. Okay.
Just, so you can't always be losers, and while they consider themselves losers, they'll always be the victims and play the victim's card.
John, thanks for your thoughts. That's John in East London. Peter in Croydon's been in touch on this one as well. Peter, what would you like to say?
Hello, Peter. Yeah, I think the strap's been what's said about the ceasefire being 70 days. I mean, Israel can't accept that, surely. I mean, Hamas is going to go away. And,
well, you're right, Peter, in that Israel has been totally consistent from the start, saying, give back all the hostages. There are 58 of them in Gaza at the moment, and Hamas should disappear. They can even go into exile, and the war will be over. It's as straightforward as that. What Hamas has offered today isn't that. Therefore, Israel has rejected it.
No, exactly. They just got to hand back the hostages, all the hostages. Yeah. And there's one point I like to make, Peter, which hasn't been made.
Go for it.
Since October the 7th, there's been 30,000 babies been born. Now that's 130 babies a day born in Gaza. I mean, what person in their right minds are going to get, are going to bring a child into a war.
Well, it's a fair point, Peter, and certainly there are real problems in Gaza. There is a humanitarian crisis there. I'm not trying to minimise that at all, but I do think that Hamas needs to be blamed an awful lot more than it is, and we rarely hear the word Egypt in any of this. They have a border with Gaza as well. They could send in aid if they want to. They could take refugees if they wanted to from Gaza. They do not. And lots of different countries around the world who say, isn't it terrible what's happening in Gaza? And then they're offered refugees from Gaza, like Ireland, for example, saying they're not going to take them. So put your money where your mouth is. Stop being hypocrites, is what I would argue. Now then, Eleanor has been in touch from Cumber in Northern Ireland. Just before I speak to Eleanor, I just want to play this clip again. I'll describe it for people on the radio. Really extraordinary piece of footage. It was when the French president's plane landed in Hanoi in Vietnam on a visit, and what we saw was Brigitte Macron, the wife of Emmanuel Macron, pushing his face and pushing him away. Apparently some sort of lover's tiff, we don't know. What we do know certainly is that he says people should focus on the real news. But it is an extraordinary piece of footage. It's rare to see the wife or partner of any sex of any leader globally in this situation. He realises very soon afterwards, standing at the very top of the plane, top of the red carpet that's been laid out for him, that he's on camera and he starts to wave. So there we are. Let's talk to Eleanor in Cumber for her thoughts on this. Cumber, a beautiful village in Northern Ireland. Eleanor, very nice to talk to you. What do you think?
Thank you, Peter. I don't think it's as strange as we're thinking about it. I think...
You push your husband's face all the time, do you, Eleanor?
Not all the time, no. But
every now and again.
Oh, for goodness sake. And I think he told her a bad joke and she went, oh, get out of my face.
So you don't think it's that serious then?
I don't think so.
Are we perhaps over-egging this a little bit because it's so strange to see?
Maybe. But I don't. It could be that. Who knows? We'll find out. But it's possible that it's that one.
Yeah, I wonder how long it'll take us to find out, because some of these things and relations between these people... Well, I worked in politics for 3.5 years, and what I learned was that it doesn't matter who the politician is, doesn't matter whether they're Prime Minister, Secretary of State, whatever. People have problems in their marriages sometimes. Sometimes people get along. Sometimes people are just having a bad day. Sometimes things happen. But the reasonable point, Eleanor, and maybe I'll put it to you, that someone said, if this was a man pushing a woman away, maybe we would deal with it or think about it in a slightly different way. What do you think of that, Eleanor?
Peter, women don't tell bad jokes.
Eleanor, thanks for your thoughts on that. That's Eleanor in Cumber in Northern Ireland. It really is a beautiful village, and thank you to her for that thought. Save the Children on the 25th of April last month, of course, said that about 130 babies will be born into Gaza every day over a month, into a healthcare system driven to the verge of collapse, where some may not survive complications at birth. Clearly, there are major issues here. We also heard the lie, it was a lie, from the UN relief chief, who, at the very best interpretation of what he said on Radio 4, got his facts mixed up. He said, but he should know far better, he said that 14,000 babies would die in Gaza in the next 48 hours. That is completely incorrect of malnutrition. And I mean, I really want to hear these people criticising Hamas. I really want to hear them say, where is all this aid from Israel actually gone? Lots to discuss. I'm here between now and 7, and then Jonathan Gullis is going to be in for Kevin O'Sullivan. Kevin, of course, did Morning Glory this morning. Mike's taking a few days off. Kevin was here this morning, and Jonathan Gullis will be here between 7 and 10. But plenty to speak about before then, including army leaders who are told less shouting, be a bit more David Beckham in regard to training. Rear Admiral Chris Parry is going to give us his view of the commonsensical approach to that in just a second, so stay with us here on Talk.
and he has, exactly as you've described, been played by Putin all along. But that doesn't mean that even though maybe he's a little frustrated, he's going to do anything. I will be convinced when he starts unlocking the resources for Ukraine, especially air defense, to protect innocent people from being killed, and also all the economic tools and leverage that he has. I mean, working with our European allies could shut down Russia's ability to export oil and gas.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, thank you to everybody who's been in touch, including Leslie. He says, if you're on benefits, then the two-child benefit cap should stay. No way would Starmer have the bravery to walk down a street in the north of England. How was he greeted at the race meeting and in that pub? I remember that pub, actually. That was on the electoral trail, and the landlord said that we wanted him out of the pub and had to leave, and of course the security staff intervened and so on. Speaking of heavy-handedness, army leaders have been told to shout less and be more David Beckham. The thought that David Beckham can sort of get things done by being keeping an eye on the future with aspirations beyond the pitch is what we're told. He also, of course, didn't exactly have an absolutely clear record. He kicked that Argentinian in 1998 in, I think that was the semi-final or quarter-final of the World Cup, was it? I can't remember. Quarter-final of the World Cup. Of course, I've just remembered that. I haven't. Ryan's just told me in my ear, so thank you. I want to talk to Rear Admiral Chris Parry, former NATO and Royal Navy commander. Chris, I mean, what's going on here, seriously, talking about more junior recruits? Just be nice to them. Just ask them, would it be all right if you wouldn't mind if you'd maybe do a few press-ups and maybe go on a nice 6-mile run? I mean, in basic training, I'm not saying you should shout and scream at people and be unpleasant to them necessarily, but surely the point of basic training, which I would never and could never do because I'm a total wimp, is to sort of slightly break you down and build you up again. Have that as spirit de corps and say, look, this is really tough, but you need to be tough to be in the armed services.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a difference here, Peter. I mean, obviously on the parade ground, when people are marching around, you need a big voice to actually cover the distance. Also, when you're in battle, there's a lot of noise and things like that. But I have to say, in my experience, certainly in the Navy, and operating with the army, people don't shout at each other, really. It's a caricature thing, it's sort of Blackadder-ish type sort of view on how senior officers and others are. You know, if you have to shout at somebody to get your way, then you're not really leading properly, to tell you the truth. And I just wonder if there's a bit of a caricature, as I said, going on here. It's, you know, it's never been my experience that you have to shout at people. You have to be robust, you have to insist, you have to say, these are our standards, and these are the standards you'll be expected to perform to if you have to face the enemy. And, you know, see, it's not just, you know, a sort of national enemy. It's sometimes flood, it's sometimes fire, and you have to be very robust with people. I remember when I was doing search and rescue, you know, had to be quite firm with people. Get in the aircraft if you want to survive. You know, it's so there's a difference between being robust, being you know, fairly strong in what you need in terms of leadership and shouting at people. And I don't think it happens, to tell you the truth. I have to say it's more associated with the Army than it is with the Air Force and the Navy. And I think, as I said, if you have to shout, you're not really fulfilling your role as a leader.
Well, respect is earned, isn't it? And I mean, we all knew at school, anyway, the teachers who were absolutely respected and you wouldn't ever mess with. And I'm sure that goes into the army as well. And they weren't necessarily the teachers who shouted and screamed. In fact, it is sometimes a real sign of power not to raise your voice and actually just to be able to say things totally reasonably in a perfectly normal voice and those to be obeyed. And we all, certainly in my life, there are teachers like that. I'm sure it's the case in the armed services as well. There are people you just respect. And actually, we had over the weekend a school talking in Ipswich, actually talking about teachers going on strike because discipline was so bad. It just comes back to me as a general society, not just in the armed services, that sometimes people can be kind of too nice, and respect has to be earned in some way. Chris, what was the way with the people you commanded? How did you earn respect? What were the key sort of tips that you would give to people who are trying to command a unit?
Well, I think there are two things. Main things. First is self-awareness. You've got to know your own strengths and limitations. And if you can't do something, then you get somebody else to do it. The second thing is authenticity. You can't really go out there and project a personality that isn't really you. If you do that, you expose yourself to all sorts of neuroses and poor behaviours, including shouting and bullying and things like that, especially when you come under pressure. But I think the biggest lesson that I learned leading people at various levels is you never have an emotion you don't intend. So, if there's a need for you to appear to be angry with somebody, then you've got to do it. And, I remember a chap I had, he was exceptionally good at his job, but he was very cocky indeed. And I thought, one day you're going to make a mistake. And he made a mistake, and I deliberately, pretended to be angry with him. And, the rest of the ship's company went, crikey, that's amazing. The commanding officer never does that. It must have been serious. And 5 years later, he rang me up and said, look, I'm really grateful. I'm commanding my own ship now. And that stopped me making a really big mistake, that little lesson. But I did it deliberately. That was the point. I think where you've got a problem with bullying and bad and angry behaviour is where people just fly off the handle. Because, as I said, there's a difference between the people they really are and the people they're expected to project. That's the point. It's, as I said, authenticity is everything.
I've been in this job, Chris, for this company anyway for 4.5 years, and my boss is one of those people who doesn't need to raise his voice. He's just universally respected. The Ayatollah of audio himself, Danny Morris. He has told me off, I was about to say another word, he has told me off, I think, 3 times. He didn't raise his voice at any point, and they were all totally 100% deserved, and I have remembered them, and I have acted upon his advice at each point. I just want to ask you about David Beckham. Do you think David Beckham is a good role model in terms of how he deals with things?
Well, I think if you want to know how to marry the right woman to get a good business empire going, if you want to know how to bend the ball into the net, I think it's great. But would I go to war with David Beckham? I don't think so.
Maybe a punishment for men or women who didn't agree with you or didn't do what you say. Maybe they would have to have one of his many hairstyles. Chris, maybe that's the point.
No, you never punish people. You just say, look, how did we get this wrong between us?
Okay, Chris, thank you very much indeed. Maybe Posh Spice would be a better role model. You never know. She could just say, stop right now. Thank you very much. Anyway, Chris Parry, thank you. That's Chris Parry, who is Rear Admiral Chris Parry, former NATO and Royal Navy commander. What do you think of this? Should David Beckham be the person who we turn to in terms of how we manage people and how we get certain things done? Well, let us know. 0344 499 1000. Lots on Macron. We'll come to that actually in just a second. But Mick in Wellington says recruits need to learn the urgency of command and positive leadership. Beckham won nothing, and of course Beckham was, if he had any success, a lot of it was due to Alex Ferguson, who of course was known for throwing a boot at him or kicking a boot at him and being quite sergeant major-ish in a number of different ways. This person says the people who want wet leadership in the military probably have never served and never would serve. Jane says, Anne in Kent says the army need more discipline, not less. David Beckham needed the discipline of Sir Alex Ferguson to bring out the best in him, and he totally respected the Man United boss. Remember the mark on his head with a football boot was thrown at Beckham, and I've just made that point, but it's a very, very good one. Thank you. And Jane says, on a serious matter, many women do hit their male partners. Many men stay silent. Perhaps this should be discussed more. It is always domestic violence against women that MPs and others talk about. Well, Jane, we have certainly talked about domestic violence against men. Maybe it's time we did again. There's a voice note on this from Rob, who has sent this in. It's dead easy to send a voice note in. Same way you send a voice note to anybody else. Send it through to us on 0344 499 1000. This is what Rob thinks.
President Macron being pushed in the face by his missus, and people go, oh, it's just what happens, just what women do. Can you imagine if they opened up Air Force One and there was President Trump pushing Melania in the face? Imagine the fallout from that. They'd want life imprisonment for Trump.
It's a very good point, Rob, and we do have to deal with these things seriously. The question is it serious? I mean, Macron himself says it's not. He says it was just something that happened and we should move on and talk about other things. But listen, we talk about what we want to talk about on this station, what you want to talk about. It's my show, but it's your show too. And if you want to get your point across on Macron or anything else, we're not going to be dictated to by the French. Certainly not President Macron in all his smallness. 80344 499 1000 is the number to call. We're going to talk in just a second to Jim Jatras. He is a former US diplomat and foreign policy advisor for the Republican leadership in the US Senate. This is about relations between Trump and Putin. Trump has called Putin absolutely crazy. Very, very interesting development. We'll see what Jim thinks in just a second.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to everybody who has sent in messages, including the person calling me a childless weirdo. I may be a weirdo, and I am child. Well, maybe, I don't know. Next been in touch and says, have you been on the Jungle Juice, Peter? Your puns today are worse than ever. I had one yesterday on another radio station when Whitney Houston's name came up, and I asked what her favourite type of coordination is, which of course we all know is hand-eye. Bob has been in touch from Glasgow and says the Navy is hugely different from the Army. The Navy never have to face the enemy and are more and more a technical fighting force. The Army is often at the front line facing the enemy. Army commanders at all levels have to be much more robust or they fail in their missions and are defeated, says Bob in Glasgow. Now then, let's turn to Commander-in-Chief, two Commanders-in-Chief actually, Trump and Putin. Everyone is emotional, says the Kremlin, after Trump calls Putin absolutely crazy. This is what Donald Trump said about Putin a bit earlier on.
Yeah, I'll give you an update. I'm not happy with what Putin's doing. He's killing a lot of people, and I don't know what the hell happened to Putin. I've known him a long time, always gotten along with him, but he's sending rockets into cities and killing people, and I don't like it at all, okay? We're in the middle of talking, and he's shooting rockets into Kiev and other cities. I don't like it at all.
There we are. Gosh, doesn't mince his words. But then, when does he ever? It's Memorial Day in the United States, it should be said. A bank holiday there. It's the spring bank holiday here, of course. Memorial Day in America. And Donald Trump has been talking about those who've made sacrifices in wars, of course, for American freedom. But he's also been rebuking Vladimir Putin after more missile and drone attacks in Ukraine. He's gone absolutely crazy. Very, very strong words there. The Russian government has replied by thanking Trump for his work on fostering negotiations with Ukraine and says this is a very important moment which is connected to an emotional overload of everyone involved. The Kremlin's response, suggesting a determination not to antagonise the US president, says some analysts, and Russia fired 355 drones and 9 missiles at Ukraine last night. The Ukrainian Air Force saying it was a record number of drones launched, and Russia saying it intercepted 96 Ukrainian drones across 12 regions, including 6 over Moscow. Right then, let's speak to Jim Jatras, who's a former US diplomat and foreign policy advisor for the Republican leadership of the US Senate. Jim, thank you for joining me today. Emotional overload, or alternatively, he's gone absolutely crazy. This is language which is very, very direct, very blunt, and clearly things are not great between the two nations.
So it seems. I think Mr. Trump is expressing his frustration, as well as calling Putin gone crazy. He also said that Zelensky's mouthing off is not helpful at all. He doesn't like it at all. So he had some shots at him as well. I think he's expressing his frustration that his zigzagging between Zelensky and Putin under the rather absurd notion that we can be a mediator in this war is coming to an end. I mean, he's running out of zigzag room between the two of them. And meanwhile, the Russians are pressing their military advantage, and there's not much he can do about it.
And certainly when the relations between the top two men, the two men who will certainly, perhaps along with Zelensky, have to do some sort of deal if there is to be an end to the war in Ukraine, this does not bode well. How do they get it back? How do they lower the temperature, bring the emotions down a little bit?
Honestly, Peter, I don't think they can. Here's the problem, is that the Russians have been saying consistently they want a comprehensive settlement to the underlying causes of the war, the security issues in that part of the world. And they won't agree to a ceasefire until that's agreed to. On the other hand, the West, including not just Kiev, but also the Europeans and the Americans, we want an immediate ceasefire, and the Russians are not going to agree to that. And if there's no agreement on that point, and I don't think there can be, then the Russians will keep just moving forward, and there doesn't necessarily have to be an agreement. They can simply impose their will by military means, which is maybe what is going to end up happening.
Where do you think things are in regard to any form of deal, and certainly the role of the coalition of the willing, those people from Western European nations, certainly not quite on the same page as Trump? Where does this all lie, do you think, and where does it go from here, Jim?
Well, the coalition of the willing idea, as everybody acknowledges, both Prime Minister Starmer, President Macron, and so forth, cannot work at all unless there's an American backstop, unless the Americans are willing to stand behind the Europeans who send forces into Ukraine, which the Russians say they will not permit. There's simply no prospect for that. And that gets back to the question, can there be a ceasefire in a way that allows some kind of what do they call a reassurance force to go in? And I don't see any prospect that the Russians are going to agree to that.
Jim, thank you very much for your analysis there. That's Jim Jatras there, who's a former US diplomat and foreign policy advisor to the Republican leadership in the US Senate. Appreciate his contribution today. Lots to discuss, certainly. What do you think of all of this? 0344 499 1000. Plenty of people on Twitter getting in touch, as well as Fraser Brooks, for example, who I should say is a Conservative councillor in Bexley, great part of the world. Used to have an amazing MP called James Brokenshire. But Labour told us if they reverse cuts to the winter fuel allowance, there would be a run on the pound. Were they lying then, or are they lying now? Perhaps both, says Fraser. Dallas says you question paying NHS managers big salaries to get the best people. Given the powerless state of that overblown, overburdened organisation, that strategy clearly isn't working. On pubs as well, we're going to talk about this a little bit later on in the programme, the death of the English pub. As your pub closed recently, I have a lovely pub near me. I actually go and do the pub quiz there some Sunday nights, and it's just lovely, and I really, really don't want it to close. I hope it doesn't. It's relatively popular. Some nights you look in, there aren't loads of people there, and you just think, this is a beautiful pub. It's great for the area. I love going there, even though I'm not a drinker. There are just so many people, you don't just lose a business when a pub closes. There's so much more to it. We're talking about that a little bit later on. Rufus says, if you want to talk about busy pubs, look at Wetherspoon's, always very busy because beer is not £8 a pint but £1.79 sometimes. Food is basic but cheap. I had a reasonable chicken burger, onion rings, chips with 2 pints of beer, £13. Well, others have Wetherspoons have 50,000 staff attracting footfall into high streets. Listen, I used to live in another part of London. There was a lovely Wetherspoons near me. Really liked it. Went basically every Sunday morning. This was before I was presenting programmes on this station, and would have my breakfast there, read the paper. It was just a lovely place, and the food was, you know, really good fry up and not too expensive either. Angela says, if the Americans can help stop the erosion of free speech in the UK, I 100% support their interference. Even I think twice about commenting what I really think these days. It shouldn't be like that. And yes, thank you, Angela, and please do feel free to tell me exactly what you think on Twitter, or by texting in 87222, or by giving me a ring on 0344 499 1000. That's what Rob in London has done in regard to Gaza. Rob, what would you like to say? You're very welcome to the programme.
Hi there. Yeah, it's simply this word that is constantly used in the media, war. You just used it there. What's going on in Gaza is far from a war. A war is what's going on in Ukraine. This is a long way from a war. This is a land clearance. It's salting the earth. It's a genocide, and it is nothing short of that.
It's not a genocide, Rob. It's not.
Really?
Yes. A genocide.
Let me put a position to you.
Okay, go for it.
We had issues back in the 70s, 80s with the IRA. We did not rely on third-party intelligence. We did not call in airstrikes. That was a small part of the population that caused an issue.
Yep.
We did not cause mass casualties in the general public.
Okay, that's correct. But what I would say is, if Israel wanted to commit genocide, they could easily get rid of every single person in Gaza. They could carpet bomb the whole place because they have a huge military, and they don't do that. Genocide is also a very specific term that is given to things like the Holocaust, like Srebrenica, like Rwanda. And what is happening? And what is happening in Gaza is not that. The population of Gaza has actually gone up since the 7th of October. The legal definition of genocide is if the population and an ethnic population goes down by a quarter. So that just hasn't happened. So I think the word is wrong. I totally appreciate your sentiments, and I think there is a major humanitarian crisis there. There's no doubt about that, and we have to do something about that. And we need to pressure both Israel and Hamas and Egypt to do something about that.
So your suggestion is this boils down to the demographic, the specifics of the word, and the fact that if you have a look at an aerial shot of Gaza now, there is literally little. To see two bricks on top of one another is rare.
Rob, I totally agree with you that Israel has bombed it to a huge degree. What I'm saying is that the definition of the word is wrong, and people use that word. I'm not saying you're using that word for a specific reason. I'm not saying that for a second, Rob, but there are people, I know there are people who use that word because of echoes of the Holocaust. We've seen on numerous occasions people talking about making anti-Semitic comments, saying that Israel is just like the Nazis. I don't agree with that. I'm not suggesting for a second that you think that, but I just think we need to be precise and clear. You're saying, you know, it shouldn't be called a war. That's actually a really interesting argument that I haven't heard before, and I'm actually interested to hear more from that, Rob, because I think we do need to call these things what they are correctly.
Well, I used what I believe to be a very good analogy. The IRA came over to London. They bombed in Northern Ireland. They bombed in London. We did so there was a small percentage of the population who formed a terrorist group. There's a similar situation in Gaza with Hamas.
I don't think it's quite the same, Rob, and I'll tell you why. The IRA weren't the government of Northern Ireland. They were a terrorist group. They never numbered more than about 400 or 500 people at any stage, even at the height of the Troubles. So, Hamas are thousands and thousands of people. They're the health service. They're the health service. They're the government. They're the leaders of Gaza. And as we've seen recently, there are loads of people in Gaza, an increasing number of people over the last 3 or 4 days, particularly, who want Hamas out.
But we're not talking about Hamas as a government. We're talking about members of Hamas who are armed. Now, I suggest to you that you do not know the exact number of Hamas fighters, for want of a better term.
I'd call them terrorists. I'd say there are certainly more than there are in the IRA example, given that they were until recently in control of Gaza.
But the armed element of that. We're getting slightly off the point, if I may say that. The rule applies. You can't reasonably call in third-party countries to provide intelligence to take out what is, by the vast majority, a civilian population.
Well, I don't want there to be civilian casualties any more than you do, Rob. Sorry, say that point again. Apologies, Rob.
Unless you have an intent. And I think the intent here is, as it said, to clear Gaza of the Palestinians.
I just don't think that's the case. I think if Israel wanted to do that, it could have done it long before now. But I don't think we're going to agree, Rob, but I really appreciate your comments. We've got to go to a break. Give me a ring on another occasion and we'll talk more. Lots to talk about in just a second. We've got the sports update. We'll make sure we get more calls on the air as well. Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000.
I know a couple of backbench Labour MPs and a couple of junior minister Labour MPs who I was very good friends with who worked in the party, a couple of whom worked part-time for the party, part-time in the supermarket before the general election, right? These people got into politics because they wanted to make a difference and they wanted to help, as most people do in politics. And they got there on these beliefs, these core beliefs that they thought were shared by the leadership of their party. And then they were asked to vote and support for things that were completely against that.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, now it is time for the
Sport Summary on Talk.
And Cian Reeves from TalkSport is with us. Hello, how are you doing?
Good evening, very well, thank you very much.
Big day in Liverpool. They're celebrating their Premier League title. Of course, it was secured a few weeks ago, but the celebrations today seem to have gone on for quite a while. Lots of red and white.
Well, this is what I don't understand. The celebrations have been happening for about 8 weeks, and they have finally come together with this unbelievable parade in Liverpool. 750,000 people were there in 2019 when they lifted the Champions League and paraded it through the city. And the reports there are more there. I think we're pushing 1 million. There is not an inch of pavement available in Liverpool. It is just a mist of red. The fans have been incredible. There have been no reports of any trouble or any injuries. The players, they haven't even had a chance to be able to speak on the mics yet and address the fans because the noise is so loud. it makes me... I'm not jealous, but I'm a bit envious.
Well, certainly there's a woman who, a friend of mine who contacts me every now and again, a woman called Carol, who is a massive Liverpool fan, and I'm sure she will be either out in the street or
you
watching.
Have to say, Liverpool do it right, don't they?
Oh, they do.
That is unbelievable.
The beautiful dockside actually is where they are. I mean, Liverpool is a great city. I really, really like Liverpool. I go there at least once a year for Labour Party conference, believe it or not. So,
are there normally that many people on the streets
cheering for Keir Starmer? Not quite so many, but there is about the same amount of red. Anyway, well done to Liverpool.
And also, this was the first time since 5 years when they won it last time, and they couldn't have this parade because of COVID. So this is everyone letting out their celebrations.
Double
from 5
celebration
years ago as well.
The FA Cup champions Crystal Palace, they're also celebrating. What have they been up to?
They've been parading their FA Cup trophy around Croydon, and then had a decent party at Selhurst Park as well with the fans on the pitch. It was just looked really fun. It's been a day of parades because Arsenal women as well, they showed off the Women's Champions League trophy. Tottenham, just a few days ago, they showed off their Europa League trophy around North London, and everything has gone swimmingly. Especially after what has been a very busy end of the Premier League season yesterday, where there has been some developments because Aston Villa missed out on a Champions League place, which cost them £100 million.
Not great.
Over a dodgy refereeing decision, and Aston Villa have written to the FA and the head of the referees body to complain about the referee that was in charge, saying he wasn't experienced enough. And a lot of fans have been calling into talkSPORT.
Not too happy about that.
Yeah, they feel like Villa have thrown their toys out the pram a little bit because...
£100 million though.
It is a lot of money, but then they can't blame it all on one decision because it wasn't that referee's fault they lost 4-1 at Crystal Palace a few weeks before, so...
Well, indeed. Perhaps not quite as much money at stake, but the League Two playoff final today, who won promotion?
This is a beautiful story. AFC Wimbledon, they have got promoted to League One. The Phoenix Club, every neutral wants to see Wimbledon get as high as possible. They beat Warsaw, and I feel for Warsaw because they were top of League Two from the beginning of the season up until February, and then they fell off a cliff. And now they haven't been promoted as well. There is no bigger heartbreak than losing in a playoff final at Wembley. But also, the EFL have announced that record attendances over the 3 games for the Championship, League One and League Two. Altogether, 211,000 people have gone to Wembley, which is amazing. There were 50,000 people today for a 4th-tier match.
Yeah.
You don't get that
That's great.
in any other country.
There's a lot of emotion there in a really good way. Let's move from football to tennis, the start of the French Open. How are the British interests getting on?
Well, Emma Raducanu, she has won her first round match at Roland Garros, and she's through to the second round where she'll play Igor Swiatek, the top seed. But there are concerns for Emma because she did have a blood test during the match. She was complaining of feeling unwell. Her health has been a worry, because she hasn't looked her fluent best since she has returned, but she's looked better. And I just don't want her to push herself too much to get into form for Wimbledon. But it's just good to see her on the court and winning again. And whatever happens against Swiatek, I'm sure she'll do herself proud. We still don't know what's going on with her coaching situation, though. But as long as she's playing tennis and enjoying it and winning, that's all that matters, isn't it?
And a good day for the British driver Lando Norris yesterday. Tell us about the Monaco Grand Prix.
The Monaco Grand Prix, which was just a beautiful race. He's now looking to try and push on from that because Max Verstappen has been running away with the Formula One championship for the last few seasons. He needs a bit of competition, and hopefully that will come from the Brit Lando Norris because it's not coming from Lewis Hamilton in Ferrari.
Thank you very much indeed, Cian Reeves, with all the sport there. Cian, of course, one of the mainstays of talkSPORT. Really appreciate him coming into the studio. Good to see you. And thank you to Mary in County Down, who has been in touch and says, regarding your caller Rob, the UK government did not set out to deliberately kill Irish or Northern Irish citizens in the military campaign against the IRA, nor is Israel setting out to deliberately kill Gazan civilians. Where was the hysterical outrage over civilian deaths in Iraq and Afghanistan? Where is it today over the mass civilian casualties and starvation resulting from Saudi-led airstrikes and a naval blockade on Yemen? UK military personnel have trained Saudi pilots and supplied weapons used in that horrific war. No one's calling it genocide or marching about it. That only happens when Israel, the world's only Jewish state, is fighting for its very existence. Well, thank you to Mary for that. And Leslie has been in touch and says, what does Rob think Thatcher would have done if the IRA had taken hostages from the UK, raped women, killed babies? Moreover, what would the world expect her to do, says Leslie. Well, you know, the IRA did take hostages. The IRA did kill babies. The IRA was an absolutely horrendous outfit, and we should never forget what they did. Terrorist grouping there. Lorraine says, thank you, Peter, for correcting the use of the word genocide. This word is being used by far too many who want to gaslight the public. In addition, Hamas are terrorists. They are not fighters. They use fear, intimidation, torture and murder of anyone, including the Palestinians, who do not conform to their ideology. That is called terrorism. Stephen is in Cambridge and has given me a ring about this. Stephen, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Hello, Peter.
Hi.
I don't know whether Rob has watched the same hostage handovers as I have, when he says that Hamas don't have a superior fighting force to which the IRA had. I mean, how you can compare the two, I haven't got a clue.
Well, there are thousands of Hamas terrorists. It was in control of Gaza. It is a much larger organisation. And of course, it was in executive control of the region for a long time. And of course, they didn't build hospitals and schools. What they built was a network of tunnels and more bombs and rockets, which they sent into Israel.
Yeah, and also the IRA. To compare them with the IRA is just a get out.
I just don't like those kind of comparisons because they are very they never quite work. Stephen, thanks for your point on that. I appreciate that. Thanks to Ben in Belfast as well. He says senior health service executives are tasked with leading the health and social care system through unprecedented and deep-seated challenges. Remuneration for executives is also important in terms of recruiting and retaining future leaders. Trusts employ huge numbers of people. The organisations are incredibly complex. You need very experienced and skillful leaders for that task. Well, are we getting them, I suppose, is a question many people may well ask. Let me know your thoughts on any of this. You're very, very welcome to give me your thoughts on the phone or through a voice note or through a text. Text, of course, 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can give me a ring, send me a text message on WhatsApp, or send me a WhatsApp voice message on 0344 499 1000. We'll talk in a second more about Starmer in trouble on the ropes on Winter Fuel Alliance. Nigel Evans is standing by, the former Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons. Stay with us here on Talk.
We've been talking this morning about a new theme park which is going to be built. The Universal Studios apparently are going to build it in Bedfordshire. We've been asking many of you to give us some ideas for theme parks. Alison in South Wales says in the new theme park at 5 p.m. every day they could have the PIP parade. All the people driving their brand new Motability cars.
Instead of the water rapids, you can have a road you go down that's full of potholes in a car with bad suspension and flat tyres. I don't know why they're bothering building a theme park in this country. They're going right, no one will be able to afford to go to it anyway.
How about the Rachel Reeves ride, says Terry in Birmingham. You go round and round and vanish up your own deficit. It's the HS2 ride. It travels at high speed for 10 feet, where everyone gets off and into the replacement bus ride. Tickets are £50 if bought 5 months in advance, or £1,000 on the day.
There's a strong rumour going round that Rachel Reeves is going to have a kissing booth for this theme park. So what I do, mate, I shove a £5 in the pot and you can go in and fill your boots.
Thank you very much indeed, and very generous of you. One from G, who says fast-track entry to every ride for illegals, plus a free night stay in the Parks Hotel and free food. The new theme park bumper cars will have to pay a congestion charge, and the funhouse isn't built yet, despite Angela Rayner's pledge to build houses. What about Ghost Train doesn't move because the driver's on strike? Have a good day. This is brilliant for the theme park. How about grow your own cannabis farm? Yeah, that's a good one. An Ethiopian safari park narrated by Angela Rayner, says Gary in Durham. How about that? This sums up the Labour Party to me. The one idea they have to improve growth for the economy is to basically have a bloody big fun fair. It's the type of idea primary school children would pitch, given 10 minutes to come up with something. Well, it turns out, Matt, in Royston, that it's not even their idea. But they're now trying to claim it's their idea, even though it was actually the Tories.
They have done brilliantly on breakfast, but you know on Drive you've done brilliantly as well. Downhill slide ride surrounded by ULEZ cameras so that people are fined on exit. Love it. You could have a Birmingham-themed Whack the Rat stall. If you whack the rat, you can have your bin emptied for free. On the Labour theme park, a house of mirrors where they're all boarded up because they can't bear to look themselves in the eye.
I've got a great one for you, mate.
This is for the is this for the Universal theme park run by Labour?
moat right around the park.
Yeah.
With loads of dinghies. Call it the channel and say anyone who can break in, all is free.
Imagine a Scouser say you can break into a theme park for free.
Hi, Jeremy. Hey, it's simple. You've got the Labour ghost train.
Yeah.
We're
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good evening, this is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company on this spring bank holiday evening. Lots to discuss between now and 7. I'll be here every day this week between 4 and 7 on Talk Drive, covering for Jeremy Kyle, who's taking a well-earned break. And Jonathan Gullis will be next between 7 and 10. Kevin did this morning. A little bit of a shifting of our different time slots, but always quality and always common sense here on Talk. Loads to discuss, including Starmer's benefits black hole. Nigel Farage challenges Keir Starmer to connect with working people. Someone who's definitely connected is Brigitte Macron. She connected with her husband's face by pushing him away, and that's a controversy that many are talking about. It was on the presidential plane. They have explained it away, saying it's not that big a deal. He told reporters, "We are squabbling and rather joking with my wife." I'm surprised by it. It turns into some kind of global catastrophe where people are even coming up with theories to explain it. It's nonsense. Well, I don't think it's a global catastrophe. I think it's just something worthy of comment when the French president's wife, clearly unhappy with him, pushes his face away, but he says squabbling and joking with his wife. We'll talk as well to Jake Wallace-Simons in a minute or two, or the author of Israelophobia. Lots happening in the Middle East. A potential ceasefire which has been said it won't happen. Israel have rejected it. We'll also talk about the sad death of the English pub. We're talking actually to an Irishman who's written a really interesting article about this. He himself is a manager of 3 village pubs with his wife. Are you someone who still goes to the pub, or has it become perhaps too expensive? What's the value of pubs? I have a really great one near me, and I really like the fact that it's there, even though I don't go all the time, and I'm not a drinker. I haven't been for some years. Let me know your thoughts on all of this. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me at 7222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV, follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can send me a voice note, less than a minute please. You can send me a WhatsApp text message or give me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Lots to discuss here on Talk. Stay with us. Well, Keir Starmer's under pressure for a number of reasons, specifically because he says he is probably going to change, is going to change the winter fuel allowance. There could be a total U-turn on that. We'll see what the details are. And Nigel Farage giving a big speech tomorrow. He will be talking about his desire to scrap the 2-child benefit cap, agreeing with Starmer on that, although Farage for Reform UK says he'll go further. Lots of people annoyed with Starmer. Let me just read out a couple of messages sent on Twitter. Eileen says, I'd say that Starmer should call a new election, start again with a truthful manifesto. All parties should publish their complete manifesto in detail, costings as well. Then if they're elected and don't keep their word, they should be charged with fraud. On the Macron thought as well, lots of people getting in touch about that. Lady Anne says Macron would say it's nothing, but you can see the shock on his face. And Karen says Macron has had gaslighting lessons from Starmer. Well, let's talk about Starmer with Nigel Evans. He's the former Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons and was the Conservative MP for the Ribble Valley. Nigel, good evening.
Hi. Well, it's good afternoon. I'm in Florida at the moment, Peter, but I'm delighted to be with you. It's Memorial Day here.
Yes, it is. And President Trump earlier on was talking about the huge sacrifice that so many Americans have made. It's just the spring bank holiday over here. No massive significance to the bank holiday as far as I'm aware anyway. But in America, obviously very different in regard to the Memorial Day weekend there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I went to church yesterday, actually, in Palm Beach, and the priest there spoke about the commitment of so many people during the wars, but also the sacrifice that so many of them are making today throughout the world. So it was absolutely wonderful. I also bumped into Rudy Giuliani there.
Really? Wow.
Absolutely fantastic meeting him. The former mayor of New York, and a character as big as you can get in American politics.
Certainly. I cannot not mention the wallpaper behind you, which tragically our radio listeners cannot see. I mean, it's very Florida, on the amazing lamps as well, which have palm trees on them. They sort of look a bit like a kind of an Oscar statuette that has turned into palm trees. Can you just talk us through the decor?
Yeah, it's a lovely apartment my friends Deborah and Hugh have here in Palm Beach. It's fantastic. And I just got to turn to the left, Peter, and I don't want to make your listeners or viewers jealous, but I can see real palm trees and the fantastic ocean just over my shoulder. Absolutely brilliant.
It's all right for some, Nigel. It's a good job I didn't start this interview by saying, why on earth have you checked into that awful hotel with the dreadful decor when actually it's your friend's apartment? That would have been a faux pas. Speaking of faux pas, Starmer on the ropes, certainly, in regard to a potential $5 billion hole in the budget. Now, many people say he should bring back the winter fuel allowance. Many people would say that scrapping the two-child benefit cap is a good thing. We had a guest on earlier on, John McTernan, former Tony Blair advisor, who said it is an immoral policy. Where do you stand on those two policies? And do you think scrapping, changing Starmer's mind is the best idea, is the best thing he can do, both morally and politically? Just give us your thoughts on that, Nigel.
Well, I think the immoral bit comes in with the general election that we had almost a year ago. Because during that election, he said he was standing shoulder to shoulder with pensioners. He said he was standing shoulder to shoulder with the WASPy women, that he was supporting farmers, supporting small businesses. And yet, since the general election, what we've seen is national insurance going up when he said it wouldn't. He has piled on huge costs to industry. They talked about growth. If only they'd stuck to the manifesto that they stood on, I don't think he'd be in the trouble that he is today. But you can't it was almost the first act that he did when he became Prime Minister, was to take £200 or £300 off pensioners in the winter fuel allowance. There was no mention of it during the general election, only that he was supporting pensioners. I think this is the immoral bit that's happened. You said, one of your listeners just said that he should be done for fraud. Well, it was certainly a deceitful manifesto that he stood on. And so I think you should actually give pensioners back the money that he took off them almost on the first day that he became the Prime Minister. And the fact is, he's out of touch. Peter, what was one of the first scandals that hit the government was how much money he was taking off Lord Ali for clothes and glasses and various other things. He was so out of touch that he started to defend it. You can't. You're on £165,000 a year. You've just taken 300 quid off pensioners, and yet you're on the take from Lord Ali on clothes and glasses. It's just... It's unforgivable, and you certainly can't defend it.
Your former colleague in Parliament, Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservatives, languishing in one poll on 16%, says that the two-child benefit cap should remain. Is she right to do so?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, part of the problem is that Rachel Reeves has not got the capacity to move. I mean, another one of the problems...
She says she's going to. She says she's going to find the $5 billion.
Yeah, well, that's going to be higher taxes then, or higher borrowing. Do you know, I was reading Liam Halligan this morning about how much money that the government is borrowing every year, which has gone through the roof, but also the amount of money that they're now spending on servicing the debt. And it's £105 billion, more money than they spend on transport and schools combined. You just can't carry on like that. So if they are going to bring back or increase benefits for those with more children than two, then where is the money going to come from? It really is. And one of the first things that they've done, of course, is to turn on rich people in Britain. And they've just discovered that rich people got the ability to actually get away from Britain, and they've done it in huge numbers, over 13,000 of them having left the United Kingdom. When they were in Britain, they were at least spending and paying taxes. Now they're not. They're either living in Dubai, Italy, or wherever it is that they've decided to go. Palm Beach, yeah. Yeah, there may be a few over here too. In fact, there's I suspect there are a few over here, Peter. Sadly, I'm not one of them. But all of that has gone, and yet at the same time, you've got all these people, these immigrants coming in illegally into the United Kingdom, which is costing us money. It's costing us billions to put them up in hotels and other accommodation. So none of this really adds up. And for them to then be able to say, right, we're going to give money to senior citizens, or we are going to, at the same time, reverse some of the cuts that they've already made, it's impossible. None of it adds up.
What do you make of the Farage challenge to Keir Starmer to connect with working people by going to a working men's club, seeing which one of them gets on better? We both know, having worked in politics, Nigel, that it's a tough thing to really connect with when you're in professional politics, to translate that. And there's so many of our viewers and listeners who quite rightly feel that the political class, or a lot of the political class, is completely out of touch with them. Should Keir Starmer take up the challenge from Nigel Farage? Because I think we know who's going to be more welcomed in that working man's club that Nigel Farage is talking about.
Yeah, I still remember when Keir Starmer went to one pub and he was told to get out of it.
That's
by
right,
the owner.
the landlord, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. The landlord said, "You're not welcome here." And I suspect that he won't be welcome in a lot of hospitalities because of the national insurance increase that he meted out to a lot of these publicans throughout the United Kingdom. Listen, I used to be president of the All-Party Beer Group, Peter, and I know you are going to be talking about the future of the Great British Pub. And I, when I'm in the north of England, live next door to the Swan with Two Necks, a glorious pub, which attracts lots of locals in there. And thanks to Keir Starmer's measures, these pubs are really struggling. You know, it's it's a stunt. Listen, Nigel Farage is brilliant at doing these sorts of things. Of course, Keir Starmer is not going to go anywhere near any clubs up in the north. He's just simply not going to do it because he will get some home truths if he goes anywhere near them from some of the locals who will be there supping some of their more expensive pints that have just gone up recently because of that national insurance increase.
And certainly, I mean, it's interesting we have Clive in Solihull's been in touch. Clive, I haven't heard from you in a while. Thanks for your message. Hope you're well. Love the show, PC. With regard to the Great British Pub, they have changed in my lifetime. You can't smoke there. Full of screaming children. My pint is now £5.10. I can buy 4 pints in the supermarket for £7.50. My friends and I now take it in turns to be the landlord at our houses. The company is great and we are not being ripped off, says Clive, who says that he votes reform. And people are voting with their feet on this issue. We're going to talk about it in more depth a little bit later on, but the nighttime industries, so many of them have been absolutely hammered in the last few years. Do you think that this government or even the last one really got that and can do anything to try to get our pubs back, Nigel?
It's incredibly difficult because of all the costs that the landlords and landladies throughout the country have to face. As I said, the national insurance increase and the minimum wage increase have heaped more costs on yet again. And so one of your listeners there saying that, of course, you can go to Tesco's or other supermarkets and buy a load of cans and then sit at home. But, you know, it's not the same as going out to the pub and mixing with the locals. I mean, the Great British Pub is an institution in the United Kingdom. They don't really exist in other parts of the world, Ireland perhaps being the exception. In anywhere like they do in the United Kingdom. And the government is going to have to get to grips with being proactive in bringing forward measures that are going to try and save them. Otherwise, they're going to close. They were closing at large numbers even under the Conservatives, Peter. But at least the Tories recognised they stopped the increasing the amount of taxation on beer. So that was frozen for many years under the Conservatives. But it's going to take a lot more than, you know, not putting a penny on a pint to save the pub. They're going to have to be really proactive if they want to ensure that this institution remains and flourishes.
Nigel, I just want to ask your thoughts on one other thing. It may or may not be serious, but lots of people are commenting on it. In fact, Macron himself, President Macron, says we are squabbling and rather joking with my wife. I'm surprised by it turned into some sort of global catastrophe where people are even coming up with theories to explain it. It's nonsense. It is this footage I'm going to play to you and to those who are watching on screens, whether it is whether it's YouTube or the connected device or a connected TV, smart TV, whatever it is. For people who are listening on the radio, I'll explain it. It is President Macron having his face pushed away by Brigitte Macron, apparently when they came down the steps of the plane that had landed in Hanoi in Vietnam. She was very Hanoied and didn't put out her arm, or it certainly didn't take his arm anyway, when she was walking down those steps. Tiffs do happen in every marriage, of course. We can actually see them now about to walk down the steps. Body language, not fabulous between them, but they didn't actually, he's sort of holding out his arm to her. She's ignoring that and walking down by herself. Clearly things not great between them. Listen, all couples have some sort of arguments from time to time. Many people texting in, tweeting in to say, hold on a second, you'd be taking this a lot more seriously if he had pushed her face, if a man pushing a woman's face rather than a woman pushing a man's face, and we can't trivialise that. Nigel, what do you think of this?
Yeah, well, I think part of the problem was that they tried to say in the first instance that nothing had happened. I think they clearly didn't realise that it was on camera. It's hugely embarrassing. It really is. He's president of France, and this is the first lady of France, and they are having a very, very public. Well, she's pushing him away. And everything I've read about it, that he was, as you say, the body language wasn't good. He was furious about what has happened. I mean, the right thing to be, though, is honest. Just be honest with the public. If something not right, just be honest about it. Don't try and cover it up. There's clearly a problem. I mean, clearly travelling first class on that lovely presidential plane is not good enough.
I remember actually when Boris and Carrie Johnson, I think she was Carrie Simons at the time, had a huge argument, and this was recorded by someone who then gave it to The Guardian and all the rest of it. And I think
the next door neighbour, I think. Yeah, well, hey, Peter, I think I remember that story quite well. Didn't he? She had a lovely white sofa and he dropped some red wine over.
That's right, but there was a really good line, I think it was from Jake Berry, the former chairman of the Conservative Party, who at that stage was very close to Boris Johnson, who said something like, water's wet, ducks quack and couples argue. Got any other questions for me? Which I just thought was a really, really good answer, and one that perhaps the Macrons could gain some knowledge from. Nigel, thank you for your thoughts. I'm just going to go away and ponder why I don't have rich friends in Palm Beach with an apartment I can visit. But anyway, that's Nigel Evans there. He's a former Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons and was Conservative MP for the Ribble Valley. What do you think of all these stories? 0344 499 1000. Jane says the damage is already done for Labour on the winter fuel allowance. So many MPs went on the media to justify it. Family members will never forget how many of their relatives were sitting on their coats wrapped in blankets. They will also not forget how the same MPs claimed for their heating bills. Stuart says a ceasefire in Gaza is easy. It would start immediately after Hamas released all the hostages. And Dawn in Chelmsford says perhaps Keir Starmer is just not a competent leader. We should certainly consider this as a reasonable explanation of his inept performance. Well, thank you for that. We're going to talk to Jake Wallace-Simon, just speaking of Gaza, in a second about that proposal for a ceasefire, why it was rejected. There's quite a lot of other stories around the Middle East as well. We'll get your views on all of that, and we will, as promised, talk about the sad death of the English pub before 7 o'clock when Jonathan Gullis takes over. He's in for Kevin O'Sullivan. Stay with us here on Talk.
It is a team game.
Yeah.
And Rupert, I think, is constitutionally unable to be a team player. Now, there are things that could have been done to mitigate that. He could have been given work to do. The devil does make work for idle hands. He could have been given a job. Go away and draft and come up with an immigration policy, Rupert. Come back to us after doing the hard work, doing the hard graft, doing the miles, getting the information, doing the research. Come back to us with a reasoned, considered immigration policy to take forward to 2029. That would have been a useful thing.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, thank you to everybody who's got in touch. We'll get to more of your messages and calls a little bit later on. Jake Wallace-Simons is with me now. He's an author and columnist and author of Israelophobia, the newest version of The Oldest Hatred and What to Do About It. Jake, great to see you this evening. How are you doing?
Good afternoon, I'm well. How are you?
Very well, thank you. There's lots to talk about in regard to what's happening in the Middle East. We'll get to that in just a second, Jake. But what I'm interested in is these stories. There's been quite a few of them. There's one you tweeted about, which I saw this morning, in regard to a man arrested for shouting "God bless Israel" at a pro-Palestinian march. We've heard, of course, over the weekend about a Jewish protester charged over a placard mocking a leader of Hezbollah. I just wonder if you could just talk me through the first bit of that in regard to the man arrested for shouting "God bless Israel," because this is something that, in regard to many of the discussions about two-tier policing and how a lot of these protests are policed, that we do need to talk about. We've talked about it a lot on this programme, and indeed Peter Cardwell as well, who was on the pro-Palestinian side of one of those marches, actually, with a placard talking about one of the Palestinians who stood up to Hamas and was arrested for his efforts. Clearly the police are just not getting this right.
Yeah, this is the latest example of so-called two-tier policing, or at least apparently. We don't know all the details of this, we should add. But going from the footage that we've seen and the reports that seem to be around, this chap was shouting "God bless Israel," along with the slogan "Am Yisrael Chai," which is Hebrew, and it means the people of Israel live, or live on. And that slogan, by the way, derives from 1945 at the liberation of Bergen-Belsen, when the BBC recorded a Shabbat service for survivors who had just been liberated. And the Jewish British Army chaplain coined that phrase, "Am Yisrael Chai," in the smoking wreckage of World Jewry in 1945 and in Bergen-Belsen. So it's a very evocative and powerful slogan you'll hear people saying in Israel in response to the Hamas atrocities and so on. So he was saying that and was arrested for his troubles. It's the latest seeming example of two-tier policing by the police. We've seen them protecting marchers in Manchester with banners saying, you know, "Up the Intifada," just days after October the 7th. We've seen so many examples, them excusing away the use of calls for jihad on the streets of London. And another example, of course, the Telegraph reported on just the other day. A Jewish protester was apparently arrested for holding up a cartoon of the Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, who was assassinated by Israel and not before time, just a few months ago. And in the footage from the interrogation of that protester, the police were apparently accusing him of offending pro-Hezbollah supporters. And the police didn't seem to be really aware that if there were any Hezbollah supporters there, they should be arresting them, because Hezbollah is a prescribed terrorist organisation.
Yeah, the police were worried and said in their questioning that they were worried people who were pro-Hezbollah would be offended. Well, if you're supporting a terrorist organisation, I couldn't care less if you're offended. In fact, I want to offend you if you're supporting terrorists.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there does seem to be a great moral and practical confusion in policing of these things. Some of the police just don't seem to know what they're doing, don't seem to know what Hezbollah is. We saw them the other day, you know, investigating that poor retired special constable for his tweet, going through his Brexity books as if they thought that was a book like
very Brexity things.
Extremism.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they just don't know what they're doing, some of them, and they also seem to be responding to a cultural instinct to hammer Jews, to hammer people who happen to be not towing the progressive line, and to go very, very softly on progressive radicals, on Islamic radicals, and so on. So this culture really seems to be to blame here.
Do you know who I feel really sorry for, Jake? I don't know if you saw that footage of the Liverpool protest, the Liverpool supporters, I should say, the Liverpool supporters being so happy, incredibly happy at their teams winning the Premier League. And then in the middle of this lovely celebration in Liverpool, a pro-Palestinian protester comes up and gets on a plinth and starts sort of brandishing his Palestinian flag. And one Liverpool supporter, having a bit of a laugh, pulls down his pants, and we see the pro-Palestinian protesters bare buttocks.
That's right. I mean, you know, you stand up against genocide, you're trying to do the right thing, and someone pulls your trousers down. It's not
our thoughts and prayers are with him. And in fact, I was so concerned that I shared the clip on social media so other people could be as concerned as I was. Just on a more serious note, speaking about the man arrested for shouting "God bless Israel," well, the Metropolitan Police say we're aware of a clip that has been shared on social media showing a 40-year-old man being arrested outside King's College on Friday. He was arrested on suspicion of criminal damage and a preventive breach of the peace. The criminal damage allegation relates to an incident not shown in the clip being shared. The man has been released on bail while our inquiries continue. We'll bring you any developments on that, of course. Jake, maybe we could turn to what's actually happening in the Middle East, and Hamas agreeing to a US proposal on a Gaza ceasefire, but Israel rejecting that. Just talk us through that. Clearly, Israel's been very clear from day one: give back all the hostages, 58 of them still being held in Gaza. We don't know how many are alive and how many are not. And Hamas, you know, be gone, go into exile at the very least. That's Israel's been consistent and clear on that, but there will be many people disappointed that the ceasefire offer anyway has been rejected by Israel.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of confusion around at the moment. I mean, you know, the reports that Hamas had accepted a proposal, Israel had rejected it, were then denied. And then about an hour ago, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, sent out a message saying that he was hoping for good news on a hostage swap and a ceasefire today or tomorrow. But then in the last sort of 10 minutes, his office has walked that back. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and bits and bobs are leaking out to the public, but we don't really know until we know. I think the overall picture, of course, is that this is a strange negotiation because it's a zero-sum negotiation. Israel want to see Hamas gone. They won't stop until Hamas is gone. Hamas won't stop until Israel is gone. Of course, it won't ever be gone, but that's what they want. Israel wants all the hostages back, and Hamas knows that if it releases all the hostages, it will lose any last playing card it has to survive. And so it's not really a situation where you can compromise. You know, Golda Meir, the famous Prime Minister of Israel in the 70s, famously said that, you know, they want us dead, we intend to live. Between death and life, there isn't much where you can compromise. And that's really where Israel finds itself. So within all that, we're hoping to see some hostages back. It's notable that the leader of the organisation representing the families of the hostages said that the deal that Hamas was supposedly talking about was worth rejecting because it obviously didn't include anywhere near enough hostages to make it worthwhile. But I think the final observation I would make is that the Hamas are clearly rattled, they're suffering, they're under military pressure, and that is why they are at the negotiating table engaging in these talks. So all those people across the West who are jumping up and down saying to Israel, look, for God's sake, let Hamas survive, you know, are basically condemning the hostages to a life of torture, imprisonment, and eventually death. If you want the hostages back, if you want Hamas to be defeated, there's no way to do it other than military action. And we need to just find a spine and get behind Israel and get behind our values that we share and stand against the forces of jihad.
And of course, there are an increasing number of anti-Hamas protesters over the last 4 or 5 days and previously in Gaza. They have been dealt with very, very brutally by Hamas, but there are so many more of them. Clearly, there are innocent people within Gaza who are standing up against Hamas terrorists. And in a shock move, a lot of the Western media ignoring that. We're not ignoring it, and I'm sure you're not either, Jake, in your reporting.
That's right. I mean, I've got a friend in Gaza. I talk about him a fair bit. I speak to him on the phone from time to time, and he rings me up or WhatsApps me fairly regularly saying, you know, for God's sake, won't somebody cover these protests that he's taking part in? In fact, he himself is a little bit worried because he's had a couple of mild threats from Hamas after taking part in the protests himself. And he's trying to get me to help him to get out of Gaza, which I'm trying to do. But, you know, he is saying, look, we're standing up against Hamas. We're doing our best. And we look at the footage coming out of Britain of people, you know, going on pro-Palestine marches. What are they doing? He actually said to me, you know, I'd like to see one of them come over here in Gaza and see how they fare, waiting for 3 hours to have a shower because you have to get the water and heat it up with a fire and all this sort of stuff. You know, then let's see how they. I think he actually said how would they cope without gender-neutral toilets. Actually,
I don't see Hamas bring those in anytime soon. Jake, thank you so much as always. Jake Wallace-Simons, their author and columnist, author of Israelophobia, the newest version of The Oldest Hatred and What to Do About It. Thank you to Clive, who has contacted me again and said, "Hi Peter, if Keir Starmer is such a brilliant lawyer, why can't he stop the boats and smash the gangs with his great knowledge of the law? I guess either he doesn't want to or he doesn't care. We need to come out of the ECHR and the European Court of Justice as well. He won't do that because he hates our country," says Clive. Thank you for your thoughts on that. We'll get more thoughts on Gaza, on two-child benefit, and we are, as promised, going to talk about the sad death of the English pub. We'll talk to Rory Hanrahan in a second. He is a pub landlord, he's a writer, he's originally from Ireland, and he now lives in Oxfordshire, where he manages 3 village pubs with his wife. Quite a lot of reaction to this as well, and if you want to ring me about it, you're very welcome to do so. 0344 499 1000. There are 27.5 minutes between now and 7 o'clock when Jonathan Gullis takes over. He's in for Kevin O'Sullivan between 7 and 10 this evening. Kevin back tomorrow. Mike's back tomorrow in the morning as well, and Kevin back in the evening. Kevin was filling in for Mike this morning, as you probably know, and of course I will be here all week with Drive between 4 and 7, filling in for Jeremy Kyle, who's taking a well-earned break and recharging his batteries. But plenty to talk about in the next now 27 minutes. Stay with us here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, thank you to the person who's been in touch on Twitter to correct me. In a shock move, I got my football teams wrong, and it was actually Sunderland who, of course, won promotion to the Premier League by beating Sheffield United in the playoff final on Saturday afternoon. And I'm not reading that off the screen. Ryan hasn't just written it, the producer. Sunderland, it was Sunderland supporters, a Sunderland supporter, who just cruelly, really callously, in the midst of all those celebrations of Sunderland supporters, just really humiliated that pro-Palestinian supporter, who got up in the middle of it all with a pro-Palestinian flag and pulled his trousers down, exposing his bare buttocks. It's so horrible to the pro-Palestinian supporter, and I really feel for him. And in fact, I really want your thoughts and prayers. In fact, I'm retweeting it right now, so you can see how dreadful it was. And yes, all I can say is I don't support a team, but if I'm going to support a team in the Premier League, maybe it's Sunderland. Right then, thank you to so many people who've been in touch about the sad death of the English pub. James says, I miss the pub so much, but I can just only afford the odd night out to the 1 or 2 pubs still near me because so many have shut. Yes, because of the cost, but because also the community where I live, many people don't drink because of their religion. Anne in Kent says, Peter, the pubs in rural Kent are really struggling and are disappearing. Their drinks prices are ridiculous. Decor-wise, they all look the same, offering food that's way too fancy for a pub. They did well in the good times, but people are struggling now and are staying at home. I've just spent the weekend in the Lincolnshire Wolds, and the 2 pubs I visited were by comparison very healthy, full of locals, having a great time, no posh food offerings, just good pub grub, pies and fish and chips, things like that. Nigel Farage would be very welcome in these Lincolnshire rural pubs, but Keir Starmer would definitely be thrown out. Starmer is definitely not in touch with working people. He's only in touch with the Islington champion socialists and the globalists, says Anne. Well, thank you. Covering a couple of topics there. Really lovely article by Rory Hanrahan that I read today. He says, at the best, pubs are living rooms for the nation. He's written this on the Spectator website. He's talked about the problems and says it's not just a rural problem. In London, old boozers become boutique flats or wine bars for hedge funders. In North Shields, a mate who weathered decades behind the bar lost his pub to a rent hike from a Dubai-based property fund. The enemies shift: greedy landlords, distant investors. But the result is the same: another boarded up local, another piece of England gone. So what's to be done about it? And the twin scourges of our age that Rory also writes about, loneliness and isolation, is a big thing. And of course, it's something that so many pubs are a good thing to counter. Well, Rory is a pub landlord. He's a writer. He's originally from Ireland. He now lives in Oxfordshire. He manages 3 village pubs with his wife. Rory, thank you for joining me this evening. Tell us.
Hi, Peter, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Tell me about your thoughts on this, because you know pubs really, really well. You've managed loads of different pubs right around the country, and I know that you know how special they are.
Yeah, I think what it really comes down to with pubs is that they become a centre of a community at their best. They become a place where people meet, where they talk, where they relax, where they escape from work and technology, where they can just be together, you know, where they're allowed to just laugh and joke and relax and have a little bit of fun. You know, they're the community centre. When the church is gone, when there's no scout hall, the pub becomes more and more and more important. More things are run through the pub, more community, charity events, raising money for cancer on like Milling Cancer Mornings, heart disease awareness, and especially a village pub, which will often have, you know, a defibrillator outside it. It'll often have a St. John ambulance, you know, guys that come there meet to run the local St. John's ambulance, Duke of Edinburgh awards. And anything that's going on will be through the pub. Once you take that away, where do people meet? Where do people have these events? Where does this community stuff happen? And then, of course, people separate them. And we end up with a sort of a diversification of a population that no longer is talking, no longer is meeting, no longer is seeing each other.
Tell me a little bit about how pubs have changed, because we have a number of people contacting us, not just the ones I read out there a minute ago, but right throughout the programme, saying, like, I'd love to go to the pub a bit more, but actually it's just so expensive for so many people to go to the pub and to have, you know, you go out, you have a meal, you have maybe a few drinks or whatever. That's like going to a restaurant, which so few people can really afford these days. But just give us, A, your thoughts on that, and B, maybe an idea of the pressures that pubs have been under over the last few years, because we've seen the minimum wage go up, we've seen price of food go up, and of course rates and taxes and national insurance. Just talk us through all that, Rory.
Yeah, so drinking out has become very, very expensive. You know, the average pint in the country is probably sitting around £5 now, you know, between north and south. Obviously, a huge difference to London and the home county, say, to North Yorkshire or Bolton or parts of the Midlands, where it's still relatively cheap as a percentage of wages. But what's happened probably in the last 30 years is a pint as a percentage of your wage. You know, wages have stayed roughly, the average industrial wage is probably about £28,000 for argument's sake. And a pint 25 years ago was around £2.50, £2.80. A pint's now for £5, but I'm still earning £28,000, £30,000 a year. And that becomes a very expensive evening out. The problem is, of course, is that most pubs make almost no money from selling alcohol. This is something people probably don't realise.
It's about the food, is it? It's about the food?
It's about the food, and certain items, spirits, soft drinks, have very high margins on them. But actual beer has become virtually a service. You're making 10, 15p in a pint, and yet you're charging a customer over £5.
Yeah.
And where it's lost is in our exceptionally high rates of VAT, our exceptionally high business rates. You touched on the increase in national insurance rates. So to give you an example, if you had a KP working on minimum wage, doing 48 hours a week, he would now cost you £38,000 a year to wash up some dishes. This is a huge cost. So if you imagine there's a chef in there and £50,000 a year, we've got a wage bill of £100,000 there straight away before we do anything. You know, the cost of water, the cost of electric, the tide model that exists, which was brought after the beer orders that Margaret Thatcher brought in to break up the monopoly of the big breweries. An excellent idea at the time. That's what evolved. The gastropubs came out of that because it allowed people a low-cost entry into pubs. And so chefs, mainly initially in sort of parts of North London, Clerkenwell, were able to buy pubs, lease them, you know, pay a bit of a deposit. And that's where you had the gastropub phenomenon come, the increase in food and everything come from. But the problem with that has been, of course, that you're then tied to buy beer from that brewery. And they have to make a profit.
Well, it's interesting you mention that because Ernie has been in touch with a WhatsApp message and says, "Hi Peter, has anyone thought of blaming the breweries for the decline in pubs? It was the pubs that made them their fortunes, yet they sell a box of 10 pints to the supermarkets for the same price as they sell the pubs for 1 pint. That is where the problem lies." I wonder whether you think the breweries have some role in this, Rory?
They do. And the problem is, of course, is that a lot of the pubs are massively overvalued. So a lot of these pubs were bought in the late 90s. That's when the pub companies, most of them who don't actually make any beer, they're essentially like almost an estate agent who owns pubs. Sometimes it might be long leases they own, but as often as not, they own the freehold. The problem they have is they overpaid for these pubs. They were massively overvalued in the late 90s when you had what was a terminology called vertical drinking. If you remember Men Behaving Badly, okay, the TV show?
Yeah.
So it became about lager. We knocked pubs through, we made them into one room, standing up, drinking as much as you possibly could, as fast as you could. So there was a lot of money made, but they destroyed a lot of the reasons why pubs work. They opened them all day, they increased their trading hours. But what that actually led to was less people at the same time eventually, less atmosphere, not as enjoyable. They became a bit rough in some places. So the breweries paid based on this very short fad for vertical drinking around football, around the Euros in '96. And it was a cultural flip that didn't last particularly long, but it overvalued most pubs in the country massively. And so they paid massively too much to the pubs. They then had to lease the pubs out to a landlord who then rents the pub. They had to keep the rents low to get the landlords in relatively. So how are they going to make the money back? Well, they make it back on increasing the price they sell the beer to you. They then put you into a tie where you can only buy particular products from them, which means, I'm going to use rough figures because it wouldn't be fair to use exact figures, but for argument's sake, I can buy a keg of Guinness free of tie for about 115 quid. Off a brewery, it's over £240.
Wow. Okay.
Depending on the brewery.
Yeah.
The difference is phenomenal. And the breweries the pub calls aren't necessarily making any money either.
So how do we fix this, Rory? I know the Spectator that you're writing for, they've called for a pub czar to fight their corner, but what do you think needs to be done to fight for not just pubs? I know you've written a little bit about churches as well, the twin anchors of village life, you call them. And what do you think, how can we turn this around and get people back into pubs, do you think?
Well, you see, I mean, I'm glad you touched on churches, Peter, because churches had Philip Larkin, you know, the great elegist of the village church. We haven't had an elegist for the village pub, you know.
Maybe you're it.
I'm not so sure about that, but we'll see.
although Philip Larkin and Men Behaving Badly in the same interview, I'm not entirely sure that was on my bingo card at 4 o'clock this afternoon, Rory. Sorry, I'll let you answer the question.
No, that's great. I'll throw Eric Hoffer into the mix as well, and we'll have a complete sort of confusion. But I'm glad you touched on churches, because I think the point I'm trying to get at is it's not about alcohol. It's not about drinking. I don't drink myself. It's not about boozing. It's not about getting drunk. Alcohol is a wonderful thing when enjoyed moderately and having fun and enjoying yourself with your friends. It is about allowing the continuation of something that has existed in this country since, as far as I can see, the 7th century AD, if not longer. We have pubs in this country that have had their doors continuously open bar lockdown for literally centuries. In any other developed country, those sorts of buildings would be almost national trust items. Do you know what I mean? I mean, some of these buildings are incredible. So the pub codes aren't making money. Publicans aren't making money. Breweries aren't making money. So where do you find the sort of synthesis of trying to match these competing things together to keep the pub open, people making a healthy living? One of the things that's been very successful, what they call community pubs, where the community will come together and buy the pub in the village, you know? And yes, you end up with a committee, and we all know the horrors of committees. And you can imagine the sort of people that want to be on the committee, but it saves a pub, and the pub becomes what it really needs to be, which is the heart of that village, that community, or that town, that suburb in a bigger city. And I think there's a mix between pubs being able to move away from the tie. We need to change some of the laws. Pubs need rate relief. They need VAT reductions. We need to re-examine the role of VAT as opposed to, and where the money has been raised and how it's been costed. But we do need, I think the Spectator have got something right. We do need a pubs hour. We need somebody, in the government looking at this, because if we lose it, it will never come back.
Rory,
and it's fundamental to our way of life.
Rory, thanks so much for your thoughts. It's a great article. It's on the Spectator website. It's called The Sad Death of the English Pub by Rory Hanrahan there, who is a pub landlord. He's a writer, originally from Ireland. He now lives in Oxfordshire. He manages 3 village pubs. Lots to discuss. I know a lot of people have been in touch on this and on Gaza and two-child benefit as well. We will make sure we talk to Jonathan Gullis as well. He's in for Kevin O'Sullivan between 7 and 10. We'll have a quick chat with him before the news, and we'll be back after the break. Stay with us.
It is a team game. Yeah. And Rupert, I think, is constitutionally unable to be a team player. Now, there are things that could have been done to mitigate that. He could have been given work to do. The devil does make work for idle hands. He could have been given a job. Go away and draft and come up with an immigration policy, Rupert. Come back to us after doing the hard work, doing the hard graft, doing the miles, getting the information, doing the research. Come back to us with a reasoned, considered immigration policy to take forward to 2029. That would have been a useful thing.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Some breaking news now on Talk, and Merseyside police have confirmed people have been hit by a car in the city centre of Liverpool. A police spokesman said, "We are currently dealing with reports of a road traffic collision in Liverpool city centre. We were contacted at just after 6 o'clock today following reports a car has been in collision with a number of pedestrians on Water Street. There's a large police presence around Water Street and Dale Street in the city centre of Liverpool this evening. Pictures are showing a large number of emergency service vehicles at the scene. The police say the car was stopped at the scene and a male has been detained. Emergency services are currently there. We will issue more updates as we have them." That is news from Liverpool, that the Merseyside police are dealing with reports of a road traffic collision in Liverpool city centre. A number number of people apparently injured there. A car in collision with a number of pedestrians. Of course, we'll bring you the latest developments as we have them right throughout the evening here on Talk. Jonathan Gullis is on between 7 and 10, and he will bring you any more information we get out of that. And in Liverpool, of course, there are many, many tens, hundreds of thousands of people celebrating, perhaps even millions of people, perhaps even 1 million people or more than that. We don't know the full estimations, but we know there are many, many people, of course, celebrating the wonderful news for Liverpool Football Club that they won the Premier League, and that victory parade with the team in an open-top bus has been held today. But just to bring you up to date, and just to reiterate that for people who are just tuning in or maybe missed the start of what I'm saying, Merseyside Police confirming that people have been hit by a car in the Water Street and Deal Street area of Liverpool city centre. There's a large police presence there. Pictures that are coming into this newsroom are showing a large number of emergency service vehicles at the scene. Merseyside Police saying we are currently dealing with reports of a road traffic collision in Liverpool city centre. We were contacted at just after 6 o'clock today following reports a car had been collision with a number of pedestrians on Water Street. The car stopped at the scene. A male has been detained. Emergency services currently on the scene, and Merseyside Police promising that more updates will be issued as they have them. We will certainly bring you all the information that we have, verified information here on Talk right throughout the evening. I want to talk to David in London now. He has given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. He wants to talk about the political controversy of the two-child benefit, which of course Keir Starmer seems to want to scrap. David, what do you think about this?
Yeah, obviously, what I'm going to say is not as important as what's happening in Liverpool. Look, Peter, I've been interested in politics since I came out of short trousers. I've been a UKIP, Brexit, Reform member, councillor, everything. I cannot understand. If Nigel's listening to your programme, I'm sure he does. I hope so. I'd like him to explain why are we going to scrap the two-child benefit? I just cannot understand. In this day and age, personally, in this day and age, 2 children is enough. If anybody wants more than 2 children, I'm afraid they should pay for it.
Yeah, David, I think it's a really interesting point, and it is a very strange thing when you have Nigel Farage and Keir Starmer agreeing on a political policy. Usually they're diametrically opposed, and then in the middle of this you have Kemi Badenoch saying that the cap should stay. What's your position on it, David?
As I said, I just can't get my head around it. I've been interested, I've been involved in politics for many, many, many years. Cannot understand it. I'm trying to get my head around it. It just doesn't make any sense at all. And in fact, you know, it's not racist at all, but there are certain people who want to have 5...
Well, there are certain groupings, certainly, you're absolutely right, David, that is factual, that there are ethnic groupings that tend to have larger families. But, of course, Nigel Farage in favour of scrapping this. It'll be really interesting to hear tomorrow when he gives a speech in London about this, that he is, what he thinks about it. What would you like him to say, David?
Well, I'd like him to explain. I'm always interested in being persuaded, Peter.
Yes.
If someone can persuade me, I just cannot understand. As I said, I've thought it, and I just cannot understand it. And I'm hoping, I don't know if he's going to ask any questions. Joking aside, it's probably a bit late for him to ring you in now.
Well, David, certainly we will have full coverage of that speech tomorrow. We'll have someone down there, actually, who will be reporting into all our programmes, including Drive. I'll be here between 4 and 7. And I just want to reiterate the news that we're getting into our newsroom, which is that an incident has been reported near the Liverpool parade. Of course, many, many hundreds of thousands of people, perhaps even over 1 million, perhaps more, in Liverpool, celebrating Liverpool Football Club's huge and historic victory in the Premier League. What we have been hearing is that Merseyside Police are dealing with an incident in Liverpool city centre, a large police presence around Water Street and Deal Street in Liverpool city centre. Pictures showing a large number of emergency vehicles at the scene. Merseyside Police confirming people have been hit by a car. The car stopped at the scene. A male has been detained. Reports a car had been in collision with a number of pedestrians on Water Street. Emergency services are at the scene. Merseyside Police saying they're going to issue more updates when they have them. We're currently dealing with reports of a road traffic collision in Liverpool city centre. We will, of course, bring you the very latest on that when we have that. And Jonathan Gullis, who is here between 7 and 10. Let's hope it is something that that those injuries and people will be okay. But we will see, of course, what happens. Any more detail that we get, Jonathan will bring you. Jonathan, it's going to be a busy show for you. What else are you talking about?
Well, look, like you, we're quite intrigued by what's going on with Reform UK, this pivot on the two-child benefit cap trying to outflank Labour. But are they taking their base for granted? Is there a risk here of undermining Reform core voters who overwhelmingly
very
are
interestingly,
not
talking to David, I don't know if you heard a bit of that call while you were waiting there. There are people, and quite a few people, texting, tweeting in and saying, hold on a second, I've supported. Now, in fairness to Nigel Farage, this has been his position for some time.
Yeah.
This isn't new, but I think it's the first time really, I suppose, that it's mattered to such a degree politically.
Yes, and I think it's also weird for the Conservative Party to just say, well, they don't agree, and not actually try and come up with what's the alternative. For example, a former Conservative MP, Ranil Jadwara, suggested, for example, making the marriage allowance fully transferable like a personal allowance, which is about £6.1 billion, so not massively far off what Reform are pledging to spend on welfare themselves. And would that not therefore try and create a bit of a wedge between that core sort of voter base that both Conservative and Reform are fighting over? I just think it's interesting, but of course we're also going to be looking at the NHS bosses who are getting paid ridiculous sums of money.
I'm sure they're worth every penny, Jonathan.
Well, NHS waiting lists might beg to differ, but I tell you what, I think the government's going to have to do something about it, and we're actually going to be joined at the start of the show by the newly elected mayor for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, Paul Bristow, Conservative, to get his views about the fact that it's one of his NHS trusts that are paying 8 staff over £100,000, yet are one of the worst performing NHS trusts in the country. What as a mayor can he do to assure value for taxpayer money? And of course, the Macron. No one can escape what's going on with Monsieur and Madame Macron at this moment in time. I'm sure you've had your social media watch with it.
Loads of people in touch.
Too. And then, of course, Donald Trump. He keeps talking tough about Putin. He's now gone as far as to say Putin's gone crazy. But are we actually ever going to see any sanctions or actions from Donald Trump? Because ultimately, the war of words is as what it is at the moment, but does it end up being something more than that? He's going to have to make a decision.
Where do you stand? You're a former MP. Where do you stand on the two-child benefit cap?
So I'm sympathetic to the idea of it, because ultimately there are, in a place like Stoke-on-Trent, a lot of kids trapped in poverty. And I think if you frame this discussion around child poverty, and if it's the easiest route, which many economists say it is, to taking around 400,000 children out of poverty, then I think that is a morally right case. And I would probably be pro